Welcome back, guys. In this video we're going to be learning a new language in PHP. I'm going to try and explain to you exactly what PHP is, how it's used, where it's used, and how we set it up to start using it, all the core concepts that come within it. And actually, if you started from the first part of this course, HTML, and you followed through all the way up to here, PHP, then you might be pleased to know that we've actually finished half of the course, or a bit more than half. So I would say well done, and you're just a step closer now to being a full stack developer, so hopefully you're excited about that. But we still have a few more languages or technologies to cover. So without any further ado, let's get right into it. Now, to get started, we actually want to set up a server. So we're gonna go to XAMPP, and we're gonna hit the first link, and we're gonna download the suitable version for our Windows. So if you've got Windows, Linux, or OS, make sure you download the latest one. And I'm running on a Mac OS, so I'm going to download this, and I'm going to pause the video until it gets downloaded, although it's going to take 20 seconds, but I'll see you then. Okay, so that should have downloaded now. If I go to downloads and then hit this right here, and then if I double click this, it says double click to install. If you're following on a Windows, the steps are going to be similar. Just make sure you follow your own basic installation process of hitting next, etc. For example, you won't see this pop up, but you just have to run the file you downloaded, and then it's just a matter of clicking next on the installation guide or the installation pop up. I think I need to go to security or preferences, and then security and privacy, and inside here I need to open anyway and enter my password, and then open, and then there we go. Okay, so I think I've already got this installed, as you can see, but this is basically the control panel, and what you want to do is just hit start on the different services. So MySQL and Apache is what you're going to need, and for you it should work out of the box. For me, I've got different servers set up, so I won't be using XAMPP, but XAMPP is what you want to be using, especially if you're on Windows. The other one I'd recommend using is which I believe is a lot easier to use. This should create a folder called XAMPP somewhere in your applications right here. So if you click on XAMPP, htdocs is where all the websites will be held, and you should be able to just navigate to localhost, and that should bring up your server if you've started the Apache server and the MySQL as well. Now, the one I'm using, as you can see at the top here, it says Valet, and that's the one I would recommend you use. Valet PHP install. And let's see. So this is how I would recommend you install it, just by doing brew update, brew install PHP, and then running composer global require laravel /valet. And then once you're done, you'll do valet install, and then this will configure everything that needs to be configured. This will basically help it launch when your system starts. And then say you wanted to start from a certain file or folder. So I'll, for example, open up the terminal and then go to, say I went to PHP. I've got a folder called PHP, and inside PHP I'll just simply do, once it's installed, I'll simply do valet to confirm that it's installed, and you'll see that when you run the command it's working. So here inside this folder I can do a valid link, and then semicolon, and then space, and then valid secure, semicolon, and then space, and then valid open. What this will do is it will link this folder, and now I'll be able to open it up, and the server will be within this folder. So you'll see it open up into php.test, and I think this is the quickest and easy way to get started, to be honest. So it's just going through and restarting the Nginx server, setting up everything, and as you can see, we've got php.test running. So from here, you just create different files and then use, for example, file2.php, and it should open up the file for you. And it's all going to be under that same folder right here. Now the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start by creating a file called index.php, and what you want to do is make sure that you start in a new project or in a new folder, a fresh folder where there's nothing in it, because we're going to create a few files from now until the end of the video, so you just want it to be as clean as possible. Now the first thing we're going to cover is what is actually PHP. So PHP stands for Hypertext Processor. PHP stands for Hypertext Processor. I mean, there's a PHP right here, which is an acronym, and I'm guessing there should be a pre-hyper processor. But what this basically means is that there is a processor that reads through the files, and then it gives you a certain output. And this is an open source scripting language, and the files or the scripts are executed on the server. Unlike JavaScript, which runs on the client side, which we covered in the last video. And if that doesn't really make much sense to you right now, don't worry about that, it will further down the line. But just so you know that PHP is a server scripting language, whereas JavaScript is a client-side language, and that makes it a front-end language, and PHP is effectively a back-end language. Now, the files in PHP will usually end in .php, as you can see. So we'll give this a comment. If we can just write hashtag at the start of the line, that should turn it into a comment. And basically what PHP is used for is to generate dynamic page content. Now to give you an example of this, I'm going to go to a page or a website I've recently worked on called Mason Plan. And as you can see on Mason Plan, you've got this fancy design, a bit of images here and there, and you've got a lot of content that's showing up. Now if I was to go to, let's say, services included, for example, you'll see here there's a list of different services that this company provides or covers, and these services are all dynamic services that are coming from the back end. So this is coming from a certain database where data is kept, and if I was to click on this, for example, you'll see that this page appears, and this is actually a single page, and depending on what you click on, the content changes. So this is what I mean by dynamic page content. This is a single page in the app or in the website, but depending on which service you choose, you see a different set of content appearing, a different title, a different list. So for example, if I go to heating and hot water, you'll see a different list appearing down here. Then you can click on another one and it'll take you to this page. But basically what I'm trying to point out is that this is the same page, just a single page, but the content keeps changing, and the content is basically dynamic in these pages, being generated dynamically. Now, what else can PHP do? Well, PHP can create files. It can read, write, delete, and close files. It can collect data. It can manipulate data. And there's quite a lot that you can do with PHP. and there's very little that you can't do with PHP, to be honest. So we're going to try to cover it one by one, and we're going to start off by how do we actually create a PHP script. Now, how you create a PHP script is by doing a less than question mark and then PHP, and then you just have to close that somewhere at the bottom. It's good practice to close it, although if you don't close it, it will still work, but just closing it off by question mark and then greater than sign, and everything within this code or within this tag that we've just created, any code that's written here will be executed or processed by the hypertext processor. Okay, so let's just move that to the top of the line and let's get started. The first thing we want to look at is what can we actually write in here. So I'm going to show you a very quick example. If you wanted to output something to the screen, you can use something like echo, which will echo something to the screen. We'll say hello world, as we always do. Save it, close Mason Plan, and just refresh this page, and you should see hello world. So all this has done is, using the keyword echo, we have printed out some text to the screen, and as you can see, echo is one of the ways you can print out text to the screen. Another way is print, I believe. So if you do hello world and then comment this one out and check, still showing us the same thing. Now you can put these in parentheses or just leave them as that. Both of them work. Same thing for echo as well, but I tend to use them this way. You need to also make sure that every line within PHP or every statement that you write ends with a semicolon. Otherwise, if I remove this, for example, you'll see that it shouldn't actually work. So let's try echo and see if it works. It's still working. Usually if you opt out writing a semicolon, then the program will actually throw warnings, and you'll see that down the line. But right now, maybe for echo that doesn't happen, which is very weird. But just remember, every line needs to end with semicolon. Now what makes PHP quite special is the fact that you can add HTML within it. You can add CSS, you can add JavaScript, all within the same PHP file. So inside here we can just go let's say above the PHP tags, and then we could create our HTML like we would usually do. So we'll just create a skeleton really quickly, and within the body we'll create, actually within the body we'll just copy and paste this inside there. And as you can see, what we've done is we've created a HTML, and inside the body we've added the PHP tag and we've printed some text. So we should still see the same thing. If we have a look, if we inspect the document, you'll see within body we have hello world. So that's working fine. And you can also add CSS like we said within this file. So let's just test that out very quickly. We want it to be color red. As you can see, PHP is accepting the CSS, and if we added JavaScript as well very quickly, you'll see that you're able to add JavaScript into the PHP file. Not a problem. Let's do hello world in the console. Hello world, and check the console. As you can see, we've got hello world there. Now you can also do this from within the, let's delete that, and the script. You can also do the same thing from within the echo, but might take a bit of work. But this is not the point of the video, trying to add CSS or JavaScript. We're trying to actually learn PHP here. So we're going to move on to the next part. And just remember as well that the PHP tags can be added anywhere on the page. So they can be added inside the HTML, they can be added outside, they can be added before the HTML, for example. So we can add some PHP tags here to write some PHP code right before HTML content or before HTML document, and then we can write it. We can write it, or we can add a PHP tag after the HTML document, we can refresh and just have a look at that. As you can see, one is before, one is after, and then in the middle we have the content. So just remember that you can add the PHP tag anywhere within this script. Now the first thing, as always, is comments. To add comments in PHP, you can use a hashtag, you can use the / / just like JavaScript. And if you wanted multiple lines, you could use something like / ****, and then if you hit enter, you can write multiple line comments, as you can see. Okay, so we'll just comment this out or remove it, keep the comments there. That was fairly straightforward. The next bit is the output into the screen. So we've done echo, we've done print. There's one more that I wanted to share with you, which is var dump. And what this does is it says dumps information about a variable. I'm gonna zoom in a little bit. Hopefully the previous screens were clear enough. But what var dumps does is it dumps a variable data. So if we just have a look at dumps information about a variable, okay. So we don't have a variable yet. We're going to create a variable just very quickly to test it. Hello world, and then dump it, adding the value or the name of the variable right here. Have a look at it, and we're just going to remove this because there's no need for this right now. And we're going to have a look, and as you can see, it tells you that this variable is of type string, and 11 is the character length. So this has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 characters. That's the 11 right there. I'm gonna zoom into this as well, and now we should be ready to go. I'm gonna delete all of this, or just the HTML part of it, because we don't really need the HTML at the minute. We're just doing PHP. So back to just PHP tags, and that's it. Move this up a bit. So for outputting to a screen, we've got 3 different ways: echo, print, and var dump. Yep. And then for comments, we have a hashtag, double slashes, and /**/. Good enough. Now obviously the next part is variables, and this is quite similar to JavaScript. If you've done JavaScript in the past, or if you watched the previous part of this series, and variables is just, you can imagine it to be a container that holds a certain data. So the way you do or write variables or define variables in PHP is to use the $, and then the name that you want to use, and this name must have or must start with a letter or underscore. It can't have a number, and it can only contain A to Z and 0 to 9 and underscore. So it can't contain hyphens or special characters. So let's create a new variable, and we'll name it var, for example, and then we'll equal this to, again, hello world. And as you can see, we've defined a string. A string is usually defined with quotes around it. So you can do double quotes or single quotes, and that is a string. If you do var dump like we did earlier and put the variable name in there, you'll see that this is a string. If you wanted to define a number, we can do x, and then we add the number. I'm gonna just try something, see if this works, and it does. I just added a comma so I can dump another variable, and as you can see, we have the second variable, and it's of type integer, and it's number 5. What else do we have? We also have a different type of number called a float or double. So let's try to have a look at that. I've just set a new variable y equal to 5.5 and added it to the var dump, and you can see we have a new type called float. We have booleans as well. Let's try to get a boolean out of this thing. Valid and then true or false. So boolean is either a true or false variable. So if we do valid in here, we should see a boolean. Okay, bool is, or bool is short for boolean or boolean, however it's pronounced. And these are the main three. We also have arrays. So we'll do $ARR, short for array. And the way array is written is similar to JavaScript. You can use the brackets right here. And then if we have a look at this and just add it to the list of var dumps, you'll see at the end we have an array. So hopefully that's clear. There's also another way of creating an array. We'll do array 2, and that is actually using the keyword array and then parentheses. So these two do the same thing. They both create arrays. It's just a different way of doing it. And as you can see, we have two empty arrays. Now I'm going to give it some values just for the sake of it. So I'm going to give it different letters and maybe numbers just to mix it up. In here we'll give it, actually we'll keep this one as letters, and we'll do numbers here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And we have a look at this. It looks a bit messy, but we'll comment this one out and we'll have a look at them one by one. Var dump array to begin with. Now what you see here is basically the array length, which is 6. We've got 6 different items within the array. Item number 1, or index 0, has a value of string with a character length of 1, and the value is A. Index, the next index, which is index 1, has a value of B, which is a string, and that string is just 1 character long, and then it just keeps going on and on and on. If I change this to A, B, C, D, you'll see that the first one has now become string 4, so it's a string with 4 characters, and hopefully that is clear. Now a better, more readable way to output this would be, now this is a bit, it might seem a bit advanced, but you might need to do this from time to time. You just echo a PRE tag in HTML and wrap this around it basically. So echo PRE and then echo, close that PRE tag that we just opened, and you'll see that it's a bit more readable now. You've got each one on a separate line, and I just tend to do this when things get a bit messy. Now there's another type as well, which is null. So to create a null value for a variable, we can just create a new value, and let's just name it null for now, and then we give it the value null. If we try to var dump this and have a quick look, you'll see that the value is null. If we remove this as well, so we've just basically created a variable here and we haven't given it a value, and what that will do is it will say undefined variable null, which is expected because as you can see here we haven't defined it, so this remains undefined, and because of that you'll just see a warning. And what this does, it basically gives this variable the value null. So this is the same as doing this, except that now it's, you've defined it yourself, and this, it would automatically get defined for you. So that's another type null. And the last one is object. So to create an object is basically an instance of a class, and a class is a template for an object. So to explain this further, I'm actually going to go to W3 Schools, because I think they have a good explanation on this. If I scroll down to objects and classes right here, what is OOP? Okay, so what are classes and objects? As you can see, looking at the following illustration to see the difference between class and objects. Class is something like a fruit. Objects, which is something that you create based on the class, which is an instance of a class. So you'll have an instance of apple, banana, mango, which all belong to the class fruit. Another example, the class would be car, and the objects would be the different types of cars. Toyota, Audi, Volvo. So these are different instances of this class. As it says, a class is a template for objects, and an object is an instance of a class. Now, don't worry if this still doesn't make any sense, it will, because we will actually write our own class and extend our own objects from it, or create different instances. But for the meantime, all you need to know is that there is a data type of object, and that object is an instance of a class, and a class is a template for an object. And like I said, we will cover this, but we will leave this for a later stage. Now, we've covered strings at the very top here. Now I'm going to go through some of the string functions or methods that come with PHP. And the first one I want to look at is string len. And what string len will do is, let's see just the explanation very quickly. Get string length. So that's all it does. It gives you the string length. So in var, if you remember, we had, I think, 11 characters. If we try to, let's remove null or comment it out because we don't want to see this warning. If we refresh, you will see nothing because you need to actually echo this to the screen. So we'll add echo before it, and you'll see 11 is the length of the string, which is expected because we have seen that before. Using the var dump, it gives you the length of the string. Another function is string underscore word count. So this will count the words. Now you can guess this will count how many words in the string, and I'm guessing it counts the words based on the space. So if I added a third space or a second space and gave it some text, it will say there's 3 words there. So it just looks for space that has text after it, or a character after. So if I add a number here, it will still, okay, so it does recognize that a number is not a word. That's quite smart. But as you can see, string word count counts the words for you. Another function would be string reverse, and the definition is reverse a string. Let's put a var in here and have a look. You should get the reverse string. Another function is string parse without the $, which is, let's just have a look at the definition. Find the position of the first occurrence of a substring in a string. So it will find the position of the first occurrence of a certain character within that string. So let's say we want to find where, and I just want to see the arguments that it takes. So it takes a haystack, which is the string that we're looking at, and then the needle, what we want to find. So we'll do this string that we want to search through is the var, and then we want to look for the letter R. And then let's just have a look at this. You'll see the R is an index 8. And now let me check. 1, 2, 3, 4. Actually, it starts at 0, I think, but 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There you go. And if you wanted to actually see this further, you can do var, and then to access a single character within that string, you can do parentheses and then add the number 8, the index, and you'll see you'll get that character, that specific character. You can also do the same for arrays. So we have an array here with a variable or a name called ARR. This right here has 6 different items within the array. If we wanted to access item number 3, we would use index 0, 1, 2. So this is 0, this is 1, and this is 2, right? So we do the same thing again, add in the index in the parentheses or in the brackets, and you'll see that we get the value of item number 3. If you want to find out the index that you need to use, you can do a var dump and then dump the array. Comment this out, dump the array, and you'll see which index you need to use. So these are the indexes 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. I think if you've covered JavaScript, which you should have before this should be straightforward because it's literally the same thing. One more that I want to go through before we move on to the next part is string replace. And this replaces all occurrences of the search string with the replacement string. So you search for a string, if you find it, replace it with the other string that you'd like. It takes the first argument is the search, which is what you want to search. We want to search this string. Actually, we want to search the word world. We want to search for the word world, and we want to replace it with hello YouTuber. So we're just replacing it with YouTuber so that it says hello YouTuber, and then the value we want to give it so that it searches a string. This is the string that we want to search through. So again, the first argument is the world, which is the search that we're trying to conduct. We want to look for this word. Second one is the word that we like to replace it with, and the third one is the actual variable that contains a string. Refresh, and you'll see we have hello YouTuber. All good. The next part is the number functions. So I'm just gonna label these as I go along. String, let me use hashtag string functions, and then number functions. And here we have a function called isInt. So this checks if a variable is an integer, which basically means a number. So up here we defined a few variables. We've got x and y. So we'll check if x is an integer, and 1 is for true and 0 is for false. So basically 1 means yes and 0 equals no. And if we check y, which is 5.5, is this an integer? It's not outputting anything, which is weird. If we do var, okay, maybe we need to check what this function actually does. It finds whether the type of variable is integer, sorry. Okay, so it looks like it actually doesn't return anything if it's not an integer, which is a bit strange. I'm gonna var dump just to confirm this. There you go. It actually returns a Boolean false, but a Boolean false, if you try to echo a false or a Boolean false variable, it just shows as nothing. But if you var dump, you will see that you actually get a Boolean false with 5.5, because 5.5 is a float and not an integer. If we change this to x again, you see that now we have true. It is an integer. There's another function called float, isFloat, or is underscore float, which checks if the value or the variable that you give it is a float. So we'll try to give it y instead, which is a float, 5.5. So we expect it to say true. and it does say true. We will try to give it a Boolean just to see what it says. It says false, as expected. And there's also another function called is double, which is similar to float. They both mean the same thing. I'm gonna actually return back to the previous functions that I've removed and just comment them out. So we have is int, or let's just keep the var dump there. Is int, is float, and is double. Remember, you don't need to write var dump to get the answer, but we're just using var dump so that we can see some feedback on the browser right now. The function itself is just is int, is float, is double, and there's also one called is not a number. So we'll do var dump is underscore nan for not a number. And what this does is it finds whether a value is not a number. So if you give it a string, it should say yes, that is true. But it's giving us this error. Must be of type float, string given. So let's try a number. Tells us that this number is actually a number, because if it wasn't a number, it would be true, which is what this function does. It checks if the value is not a number, but x is a number, so it's giving us false. We try float, it's telling us that y is also seen as a number, but it's a different type of number. It's not an integer, it's a float. For some reason the string doesn't work with this, so you can leave that out. It's giving us a fatal error. As you can see, it says the value that we've given it must be of type float, string, must be of type float, a string given. So we've given it a string, but it should be either a number or float. So you can't use a string with this function, only a number. So this function would be useful in cases where you want to check if a number is actually a number. We also have a similar one that is called is numeric, and I believe this one won't fail with a string as an argument, because what a fatal error means is that it will actually halt the script, so it will stop running at this point. It will just break the website if it hits a fatal error. It won't continue loading. So if, for example, at line 21 you hit a fatal error, none of the rest of this will actually run. So let's test is underscore numeric. We've given it a string, and as you can see, it gives us false. It's not numeric. If we try x, should be true. If we try y, should be true. And I guess this is a better function to use, because you don't want fatal errors like that unless you're going to handle them, and we will cover that later on as well. But if you watch the JavaScript videos, you'd know how to handle errors using try and catch. Moving on, the last one I want to cover here is count, and we can use echo for this. And this function basically counts all the elements in an array or something in an object. So say we have this array up here, and we want to count how many items we have within it. We'll use count and give it the argument of the array. We refresh, you can see the count is 6, so we have 6 items inside this array, which is correct. The other part that I wanted to cover was the array functions. So now that we've covered the string functions, the number functions, we want to cover the array functions. And keep in mind that there's a lot more that you can find in terms of string functions and number functions. I've just covered a few of the basics, but you can just look up, let's go back to PHP W3 schools. So just Google PHP W3 schools and then go back or go down to the bottom. You see PHP reference. You go to PHP array. You can go to, let's see, PHP overview. You can actually just at the bottom here PHP string, as you can see, And these are all the different functions that you can use with strings. So we've covered things like string word count. What else did we cover? String position, string length, string reverse. So each one is right here with its own description, and you can use them as you please. So here's another one. Converts the first character of a string to uppercase. So we could do that as well, just as a quick example. And this is something that I would do. If I needed a function to do a certain thing, I could just go and view all the different functions that exist and use whichever one fits the actual task in hand. So here we want to do, we said we want to do what? We want to convert the first character of a string to uppercase. Uppercase first. Put this in parentheses and then just have a look at this. You'll see that we've changed this to uppercase, although it was already uppercase. First character of a string. First, I want to use this one where I convert the first character of each word in a string to uppercase. So uppercase words, is that correct? Yeah. Save, check, and as you can see now we have everything capitalized. We can do string to lower as well, which will lower everything to lowercase, but again, there's no point in going through all of these. You can do that yourself. I'm just showing you a few examples, string to upper, and how to use them. You would just write the name of the function, parentheses, and give it the variable or the argument that it needs. Anyway, moving on. Array functions. This is not an array function. We're going to move this up to string functions. To do this, I'm just holding the option button and moving up. I think on Windows it's the Alt and up. I'm not too sure. Array functions, we've got things like we've got a sort function which sorts the array in ascending order by default. So if we give that a value of r, which is our array, and we'll do var dump, but this time we'll do echo open tag pre, closing tag pre, so that we can try and make sense of what we're looking at. We actually need to run this above here and then output r. So what this will do, it will run the function, it will update r, sort it, and then we'll get the value, and then we can just dump the variable and see the update. So we've got A, B, C, D, B, C, D, E, F. This is already in order, so that's why it's not changing, but what we can do is give it a flag to order it in a descending order. So the flag we can give it is, I believe, descending. So I'm not too sure exactly what the flag is, so I'm just gonna Google sort descending PHP and then look at this, and you should be able to see how that's done. If I just scroll down here, sort array in descending order. Okay, I'm pretty sure there's a flag that you can give it, but there's also another function called rsort, so we'll just use that for now. Rsort, and have a look at this. You'll see it will sort it from descending or in descending order. So we've got sort, which is descending order or ascending order. Comment this out and just write ascending order. Rsort, which is descending order. And you also have there's also one more thing that I wanted to show you in terms of arrays. So these are considered one-dimensional arrays where you have just a value of a string or number. But what you can also do is create an array. So we'll do array 3 up here, and then we'll create brackets and hit enter. And within this, we'll create something called associative arrays. So for example, instead of R3, we give it cars. We give it a name of cars. And in these cars, we will have, let's say we have a car of type Toyota, right? So we give it a string of Toyota. Now what we can do, this is similar to the objects in JavaScript, where you have an object that is made up of key value pairs. If you've covered JavaScript, which you should have before covering this video, but if you have, you'll remember that objects are made up of key value pairs, where you have the key on the left side and the value on the right side, and is separated by columns or a column. Here they're separated by a basically this, an equal sign and a greater than sign, and the left side is usually a string, which is the key, and then on the right side you have the value, and the value can be anything, and these are called associative arrays. So Toyota, let's say we'll give them different prices. We've got 20. We've got BMW, let's give it say 50, just random prices. What else do we have? I don't know why I keep using cars, even though I'm very bad with cars. 100. Mercedes, say 200. Mazda, last one, say 60. Close it off with a semicolon, and if we try to dump this right underneath it, actually we'll dump it down here. So we'll just grab this, cut it and paste it here so that we can see what we're doing, and then uncomment this because we want it to be a neat array. In var dump cars, we have a look at that, and as you can see we have Toyota, and then the value 20, BMW, the value 50, Aston, Mercedes, Mazda. Now these have become the indexes. So instead of previously we had numbers here, now we have text. So previously we had 0 as the index here for the first one. Well, now it's Toyota, BMW, and these again are called associative arrays. And if you wanted to access one of the values, for example BMW, what you would do is just do cars brackets and then BMW within it, and that will access the BMW index. We do echo just to see what's happening, and you'll see at the top we have 50. Same thing for Mazda and any other item in the array. You can use these keys to access these values. The same way you would use the index to access the item, you use these keys to access the values, and these are called associative arrays. Now for these type of arrays we have different functions, which is what I was getting at earlier, and one of the functions is a sort, and this will sort an array and maintain index association. So if we sort this array cars and then look at it, what will we see? We will see Toyota, BMW, Mazda, Aston, Mercedes, and you can see it's going from lowest to highest, so ascending 20, 50, 60, 100, 200. And if we do a key instead of A, sorry, not key but K, the letter K, and refresh, you'll see that now it's arranging them or sorting them based on the key, which is on the left side, basically this. So this right here, Toyota, BMW, Aston, Mercedes, Mazda, these are keys, and these are the values on the right. So this is sorting it by the key, A, B, M, and then T, whereas A was sorting them with the value. So hopefully that's straightforward. I'm going to write some comments here. A sort cars. You don't need the cars, let's just keep it out. These are ascending order by value. Key or k sort, again ascending order by keys this time. Okay, so just keep that in mind because these will come in handy, I'm sure. And the same is also true for the descending. So AR sort will do the same thing but descending order by values. And I'm gonna copy this and paste it just because there's no point rewriting it, and add a R right here. So key R will do descending order by keys, and let's just keep these next to each other actually. So A sort and AR sort, K sort and KR sort. That's good. Now there's a few more that I wanted to show you in terms of array functions. So we're gonna actually, we'll keep this right here, just remove this and remove this. We'll keep cars. Let's say we wanted to add another car into this, right? Now we have this from the database or some sort of data that is being provided to us, and we want to add something to that data that has been provided. So we have this index and we want to add another car, right? Let's say we have a new car called, and I'm thinking of a name, Lexus. My friend was just speaking about Lexus recently, so thank God for that. If you want to add Lexus into this array, what could we do is use array push, which is similar to the JavaScript function. I think it was called push, where you just push a variable into an array. In here it says push elements onto the end of an array, which is similar to what JavaScript does. It pushes it to the end of the array. And here we'll give it, I'm not sure what the arguments are again. I think it's the array first. Yep, cars. We want to push the value into arrays, into cars. And then we want to give it the value. What is the value going to be? Now the value has to be a key value pair, because this array is an associative array, so it needs a key and a value. So we'll give it array, and then we'll give it, we said Lexus, right? And then value 40. And let's just see how that shows up. And as you can see, it actually created another array. So you don't want to do this. This is not what we're trying to achieve. We don't want another array within this array. We just want key value pairs. So the way to do that is actually by not using array push. What we can do is just do cars, and then for associative arrays, usually you do this method, or use this method where you have brackets and then add the name or the key that you want to add, and then the value, which will be 40. Now if you have a look at the arrays, you'll see we've added a Lexus with the value 40, as opposed to when we do this, we actually add a whole array, which is not what we want to do. But for something like the array that we have up here, which is just one dimensional, then it's good to use array push. So we'll do array push to the one dimensional. We'll just add, is that 10,000? Yeah, we'll add 10,000, and then we'll view it. Instead of cars, we'll view R just to have a look. You'll see that we've added 1,000 to the end of the array. 10,000, yeah. Okay. So that is associative arrays. Is there any other type of arrays that I haven't mentioned? We have multi-dimensional arrays as well. Multi-dimensional arrays are basically where you have, say we have another array, and this time we have an array called, say, schools. And that array is going to hold different data about different schools. So let's say we have a school called Thomas Hepburn, which is the key. Right here we'll have a key and a value of the key is going to be Thomas Hepburn and the value is going to be another array. Okay, and that array will basically have different values, just random values really. What we could do here is have another associative array within it. So we might do that. We could say name, sorry, this should be a equal and greater than sign. We could do Thomas Hepburn, school, not school name, location, where is it, Newcastle, country, England, United Kingdom, let's just put England. I think that's enough for now. And if we just add 2 more of these, so we have another school called Broadway School, and just paste the array in here and just change the names. We want to take this name, paste it here, location, Birmingham, country, again England, and that's enough. Let's just have a look at this array. So we'll var dump schools, and as you can see, we've got an array that has 2 items inside of it, which is Thomas Hepburn and Broadway School, and each of these items is an array with 3 values. So inside this array we have the first value, or the first key, is name, and the value is Thomas Hepburn. Second key is location, and the value is Newcastle. Third key is country, the value is England. Same thing for this Broadway School. The value is an array with 3 items inside of it: name, location, and country, each one having a different value. So this is a multi-dimensional array because we've added arrays within arrays. So you can nest as many arrays as you want really. And the way you would access these different values, so let's say we wanted to access England from this array, how would we do that? I'm gonna let you try to guess, but I'm gonna go ahead and do it now. Schools, Thomas Hepburn. So you'll add schools, brackets, and then the name of the array that you want to access, or the index, or the key that you want to access, Thomas Hepburn. And then inside of that we want to access the name, right? So we'll add another brackets and then the key, which is country. We said we want to access England, so let's just echo this, and at the end of here we'll just add a dot PHP EOL. Dot is for concatenation, so if you want to add text to another text and make it one text, you just add dot. And PHP EOL is basically end of line, stands for end of line, so it basically gives you a new line. So that's all that is. We have a look at that, we see you have England at the top, and then we have a new line. If I didn't put in PHP EOL at the end there, you would see actually it's the same thing, so that's fine. I thought this would be up here, but because of the PR here, I guess it's fine. So we've got the country England as we wanted. Maybe you want to pick the location this time, and you get Newcastle. So this is what I meant by multi-dimensional. We've accessed one array, and inside of that we've accessed another array using different indexes or keys. And again, inside here I can have let's say marks, for example, and inside marks I'll have an array that has different values, right? So I'll say 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 8, 10, right? And I should have noted that between every line, or at the end of every line in the associative array, you need to have a comma, or in an array you need to have a comma, but I think you would have picked up on that. As you can see, I've added marks as an array, and inside of it we have 6 different values, right? So if I wanted to access this, I would change location to marks, and then inside here, say we wanted to access, let's just have a look at this, the marks, array to string conversion. So with echo, you're trying to output a string, but marks right here is an array. So what we can do, which is another function that we were going to speak about, we were actually going to speak about it next, but since we're here right now, let's do it. We have an array and we want to change it to a string. How can we do that? We can do implode, a function called implode, join array elements with a string. So we're joining the array elements with a string. Now I don't know what the arguments are for this, I always get them mixed up, so I just need to see them again. Implode, separator, and then the array. Okay, so we start by doing implode, and then the separator, we want to separate them by comma, and we'll give them the array. So this function works by giving it the separator. How do you want to separate the different items in the array when you join them as a string, and the array itself that you want to join. Refresh, have a look at this, and you can see now we have this array right here, 1, 3, 5, 6, 8, 10 converted into a string, so we can use echo with it, and this is the value that we're getting. Now comment this out, just take this out again and try to reuse it here and do an echo at the start. If we wanted to see a certain value, say we wanted to see the second index, or this would be index number 1, because this starts at 0 and then goes up to 1. So we want to see index number 1, item number 2, using index number 1. And as you can see, we get it right here. So this is basically us using multi-dimensional arrays, where you use multiple brackets to check nested items. So let's just write a comment on that. Associative arrays, and below it we had multi-dimensional arrays, where you will have arrays nested within arrays. So as you can see, we have an array here, and inside it we have another array, and inside of that we have another array. So we just nested multiple arrays. So that's very good. Now I've covered implode, which I shouldn't comment out. I'm actually going to keep it, but I'm going to move it up here. So we'll do implode, convert a string to, convert an array to a string, joins an array to a string with a separator, and then you have explode, which does the opposite. It actually explodes a string into an array. So separates a string into an array using a using a separator. Now we're gonna try an example. Earlier in the code, we created a var variable with the value hello world. So I'm gonna do explode, and then the separator we want to explode it by, which will be a space. So for every space we want to split the string, and then the string we want to split, which is going to be var, and then echo only displays strings, and now we're exploding the string into an array. So we need to do a var dump so that we can actually see the value of this array. And if we just check that very quickly, you'll see that we have two different items in a new array. We've got hello and then world. And what happened is that explode separated these by the space. So if say we had commas here, we had different numbers and we had commas like this, you could separate them by a comma instead of space, and then just have a look at this. You'll see that it separates each one into its own item when it finds a comma. So that's one way to do this, or that is the explode function. We also have another one called string split. So I'm going to add this here, string split. And you can see the definition here, convert a string to an array. So converts a string into an array, right? So we're going to try that out quickly, string split, and then just the string we want to split, and we'll have a look at that, and you'll see that it splits all the string into different characters. So we've got 11 different characters, or yes, 11 different characters, starting from 0 to 10. Okay, I think that's it for array functions. We've taken quite a bit of time on that, but there is a lot of functions to go with arrays, and there's a lot that we haven't covered as well. But again, you can go onto the W3 schools and look for the arrays. The next thing we're going to cover is the math functions. So for the math functions, I'm going to write a comment math functions right here, and I'm actually going to remove all of this. I think I can remove it, or maybe we'll keep it just in case. Math functions, the first one I want to go through is pi. So if you do pi and then parentheses refresh, you'll see the value of pi. Let's comment that out. Another one is min. So within min, if we just check what it does, it finds the lowest value in an array. So we had an array earlier, I think it was array 2 that had numbers. As you can see, array 2 has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So this will hopefully gives us the min value. The minimum value is 1. There's also another function called maximum or max, which will give us the maximum value. It's straightforward. I'm going to return this and then comment it out and change this to max and keep it commented out, and continue on to the next one, which is absolute ABS, and this one will basically give us the absolute of a number, or the absolute value of a number. So if you have minus 190, it will give us 190. If we have plus 190, it will still give us 190. So this basically gets rid of the negative. Another one is the square root. So let's do square root of 64, and we should see 8. If we do 91, we should see, oops, if we do 91, refresh, or is it 81? Sorry, 81, you get 9. That's the square root, straightforward. We've got the round, which rounds the numbers up or down depending on the value. So we give it a float, 9.7. Did I say round here? Round, sorry. And this will round it up to 10. If we give it the value that we created earlier, y or $y, it will round it up to 6 because that value was 5.5 if you remember. If we try 5.4, it will round it down to 5. That's straightforward. Another one is rand, which is a function that generates a random integer. So as you can see, it says min and max. So you give it a value, a number of minimum, and a number for maximum, which the random number will be within. So let's say we have 1 to 100. That random number should be between 1 and 100 every time, and it will include 1 and 100, I believe. So that's straightforward, and that is pretty much it for the math functions. From what I'm covering, there is a lot of math functions that you can look at. Again, if you go to PHP W3 schools, math functions, and let me just close all these out and go to the first link, you'll see that we have, that's a good maybe 40 to 50 different functions, I think. So yeah, I can't cover all of them just for the sake of time, but you can feel free to go on this and then check which one you want to use. Like for here, for example, for POW returns x raised to the power of y, which we've seen something similar. We see something similar to in JavaScript, and we've done rand, and we've also done round, and we've done a square root at the bottom here. So we've covered a couple, but I'm gonna stop right there for math functions, and I'm gonna move on to the next part, which is PHP constants. Let's remove this. PHP constants. So say you wanted to define a constant value. A constant value or constant variable is a variable that has a constant value that doesn't change across the script. It can't change across the script, so it gets one value and that value sticks throughout the script. It's never changed. And the way you do that is use the define function. And as you can see, it defines a named constant. So you would have to give it a name, give this variable a name. We're going to give it greeting, for example. And we're going to set it to capitals for no reason. And then we're going to give it a value of hello world, again capitals for no reason. And now if you wanted to use this, we would just type in, let's say you want to echo it out to the screen. We'll do greeting, echo greeting, and if we check this, you'll see it says hello world. And obviously you can't type greeting in lowercase because that will give you a fatal error telling you it doesn't exist. So you need to make sure that you use the same variable that you defined. So say we try to define it in lowercase, will that work? Of course it will. And this is basically a constant. So that's basically how you define a constant variable in PHP. So you just do this, defining a constant variable, a variable with a non-changing value, and then comment these out because we don't need them. Next up, we have arithmetic operators, which we've also covered in JavaScript again. And these are basically operators. And these include things like plus, minus, times, divide, modulus, and exponential. These are quite self-explanatory, to be honest, at least for the most part. So say you have A, which is 10, and B, which is 5. You've got a variable called C, and within C you want to calculate A and B, A plus B, and then echo C to see the value or the sum. And it's 15 because it adds 10 and 5. If you wanted to do a minus, instead you will get 5 because 10 minus 5 is 5. And then you want to times, you get 50. And then you want to divide, you'll get 2. And then the modulus, it gives you a remainder. So here the remainder is 0 because 10 divided by 5 is 2. So it's a perfect division. If it's not a perfect division, you will get a remainder like here. So that's what a modulus does. It just gives you the remainder of a division basically. And exponential is this to the power of that. So let's say 10 to the power of 2, 10 to the power of 1. There you go. So that's what that does. And that's pretty much it for arithmetic operators. And you also have assignment operators, which is using the arithmetic operators but adding a equal sign to it. So let's just write a comment here. Assignment operators equal to, plus equal to, times equal to, divide equal to, modulus equal to. So again, we've covered this previously in JavaScript, but we're going to go through it quickly. X equals to 10, let's say, and then we want to update x. We want to add 5 to x, right? So instead of doing x equals to x plus 5, we want to do it the short way, which is x plus equals to 5. We just put space between them. So this is the same as that. X minus equal to 5 is the same as saying x equals to x minus 5. Copy paste. This is the same as doing this. And that's not gonna work. Select this, and I can't select both. Select this and select this, and that is the same as doing that. So hopefully that's clear. Instead of doing x equals to x divided by 5 to update x, you can just do x divided by equals to 5. Same thing with modulus. Instead of doing x equals to x divided by or modulus 5, you can do x modulus equals to 5. So basically, instead of having to type in x equals to x, you can do x just once using this shorthand assignment operator. Hopefully that's clear. If it's not, we will be using this, so don't worry. It will make sense with time, but I'd say go ahead and practice it and it will make sense for sure. Comparison operators are things like equal, equal, or double equal, triple equal, not equal to, and then you've got smaller than, greater than, and then you have, let's just change this to here. We've got not equal to, value or type, and I will explain these further. Greater than, less than, greater than equal to, less than equal to, and some of these you might have already seen in JavaScript, most of them actually, except for this one, for example, which we never covered, which is the same as not equal to, and this is equal to not equal, which we've already mentioned, and this is equal to not identical, value and type. So this checks for the value and this checks for value and type. So let's run a few examples on this. We'll do x equals to 10, y equals to 5. If I can just type. And then we want to compare, and we'll do an echo to see the values. Actually, we'll do var dump because we're going to get true and falses, and with echo you can't see the false. We'll do var dump of x equal to y, right? So we'll do double equal signs, which checks for the value. 10 is not equal to 5, so the answer is false. If we change the value of y to 10, but as a string, the answer will be true because the values do match. But if we added an equal sign to this will check for the value and type, and the types are different. One is a string, one is a number. So this is going to equal to false. We can also do not equal to, which will check if they're identical. And are they identical? They're not. So this is checking x is not identical to y, which is true. So this should show you true. If I do not equal to here, so this is checking for x not equal to y, and 10 and 10 are equal. So this should return false. As you can see, it's returning false. If you do x equal to y, which is checking for the value only, you see that it's true again. And that is basically these two done. Now this is similar to not equal to. So here we're just checking for x is not equal to y. And again, it's false because they are equal to in terms of value, but they're not identical because of the type. Hopefully that's clear. Now we've got greater than and smaller than. Here we're checking for x is smaller than y, and it's saying it's false because this is not a string oh sorry, this is not a number, so it can't actually check a number with a string. It's not going to be as accurate as you expect it. So we'll put this back to 5. Now we're checking, is 10 smaller than 5? No, it's not. Changed it to greater than. Is 10 greater than 5? Yes, it is. And we also have greater than or equal to. So if we change this to 9, is 10 greater than or equal to 9? It is greater than 9, yeah. Is it, if we change 9 to 10, is it equal now? Is 10 greater than or equal to 10? It is, yeah, it is equal. We can also do smaller than or equal to, which will also be true because they're both equal. So this checks for smaller than or equal to. Changes to 8, again, it'll be false because 10 is not smaller than or equal to y. Y is smaller than or equal to x. So that's that. I think it's quite straightforward. Again, we'll be using this quite a lot, so don't you worry if it's not making any sense, but I'm pretty sure it is making sense because it's quite straightforward. If you've done maths in the past, then this should make sense. If it doesn't, you can always just look up some of these values or characters and just type in PHP next to them, and it will give you a full explanation of what it does if my explanation wasn't good enough. Next up we have incrementing and decrementing operators, so plus plus and minus minus, which we've covered previously. Let's add a comment, increment and decrement operators. Now there's 4 different types. We've got x plus plus, which will increment, it will return the value, then increment. And then you have plus plus x, which will increment first, then return the value. And then you have the same thing for minus minus, which will return the value, then decrement. And here we have minus minus x, which will decrement x, then return the value. So I'll try to explain these using this example. So we've got x as 10 and we want to increment x and then echo it. So before the echoing statements, we want to do $x plus plus, and what this will do is it will start by defining x equal to 10, and then it will increment x by 1, so it will be 10 plus 1, and then you will see 11 hopefully. But need to make sure that these are actually comments, so I'm going to add a dash or a hashtag, sorry, before each line. And then we're going to have a look at the browser and see number 11 outputting just fine. Now again, you can add minus minus and remove the plus plus to decrement, so that should change it to 9. And you can also do it in front, and the difference we'll have to cover later on, but as you can see it decrements it. The difference will be more visible when we use it in something like a loop, but we will cover loops first and then have a look at this. But just remember that plus plus and minus minus are ways to decrement and increment by 1. You can also increment by 5, for example. So instead of plus 5 or plus plus, you'll do plus equals to 5 like we saw earlier, and you'll just increment it by 5 and updates the value of x. Moving on to logical operators. Let's comment this out. Logical operators are things like, let's keep it all on the same line, and, or, Actually, do you know what? Let's do a slash asterisk asterisk slash, and inside of here we'll do and is equal to this, and or is equal to these two. And there's also XOR, which means true if either X or Y is true but not both. So I'm going to explain these further, but first I'll add the exclamation mark, which means not. Basically the inverse of true or false. The inverse. So let's do X equals to 10 and Y equals to 5 again. And now we want to do var dump. And here we'll do X is equal to Y. So we're writing a condition to check if X is equal to Y using the double equal sign, which should return false. And here we want to combine this condition with another condition. So we can do this condition that we've written, and the other condition that we want to do is X is greater than Y. So what this does is it checks this, and then it checks this. But it only checks the second one if the first one is true. So for this condition, it basically checks if this is true and if this is true. If either are false, then it will just return false. But if this is true, it goes to check the second one, and if this is true, then it returns true. So here it's false because X is not equal to Y, but X is greater than Y. So one is true, the other one is false. But it never goes to the second one because the first one is always false. We can do the other one. Actually, and is the same thing. So this will return the same thing. And these two signs are the same thing. We can do or, and here it checks for this condition first if it's true, or if this condition is true, it returns true. So if either of these conditions are true, it returns true. Which one of them is, so it returns true. And this is the same as doing these two signs, so it will still return true. Hopefully that's clear. Now XOR says true if either X or Y is true but not both. So XOR should return true because one of them is true but not both are true, right? So if both of them were true, so if we do, for the sake of it, we'll change this to Y and this to X, and we'll do minus. So if Y is smaller than X and X is greater than Y, both of them are true, it's going to show false because XOR basically checks for one of them being true and the other one not being true. Both of them can't be true. Whereas OR just returns true if any of them are true, if that makes sense. And hopefully it does. That's that for the operators, logical operator, although I have forgotten, sorry, the exclamation mark, which means not. So let's just check that out. So we've done, let's stick to or, and here we'll just change this to not equal to. So we've got Y is not equal to X, or X is greater than Y. Is Y not equal to X? That is true. Is X greater than Y? That is true. What do you think the answer will be? True or false? It's true. What if I change this to X? Will it be true or false? Remember, XOR only returns true if one of them is true, not both. So here, Y is not equal to X, that is true. And X is greater than Y, which is also true. That means that will be false. Hopefully that's clear. And we can move on. String operators is what we're doing next. And string operators include the concatenation that I mentioned earlier. So say we have a string of var2, and this is my name is so and so, right? And what we want to do is we want to concatenate this string with the previous string that we added. If you remember the previous strings, excuse that, the previous string that we added was var, and it was hello world at the top of the page. If you remember, hello world linked to var, or we stored this value in var. So now we want to link var and var2 together. So we do var dot equals to var2, and then we do echo var. So what we've done here is we've updated this value with this. So basically this is the same as saying var equals to var plus var2, right? Or dot 2, because to concatenate in PHP we use the dot notation. So this is equal to this, and here we should now see, if we add a space here, we should now see hello world, my name is so and so. There you go. And the other way to do this is to basically do it the way that we mentioned here. Instead of doing dot equals to, we just do dot and then add this. So if you wanted to add some more string or some more text into this variable, we could do var and then dot, and then whatever text you'd like can go here. And the way we've joined them together is just using that dot. So this is called string concatenation. Moving on, we're now going to look at the if statement. And we've covered this again in JavaScript, so this should be quite straightforward for you if you haven't watched JavaScript, or if you have watched the JavaScript video. If you haven't, I would recommend that you watch that before this. But basically, if statements is a way to check if a condition is true or false and run a code based on that condition. So if you have different codes that you want to run in different situations, then you would add it into if else, or one way to do it is to add it into if else statements. So say again, I've given this example in the JavaScript video. If you have in your room, for example, you have a light switch, that light switch is not switched on unless you actually switch it on. So the code within that switch might be, if this switch is on, then turn the light on. If this switch is off, keep the light off. Very simple. To write this into code terms, you would do an if statement, and then inside the parentheses you write the condition. So if you had a variable of x equals to 10 and y equals 5, I keep using this example, but it does the job. X inside the parentheses will add x equals to y, and then brackets, and then run code if true, else run code if false. So which one do you think will run? Let's just echo false, and then we echo, sorry, this is true, what am I doing? So which one do you think will actually be echoed out here? Is it true or false? Of course it's false, because y is not equal to x. If we do y not equal to x, you'll see that it is true. So it runs this code within this block. Now you can group different conditions together like we did earlier, and, or, etc. And you can also check them one by one. So you can check this if statement, and then you can add an else if up here with parentheses and add another condition. So x greater than y. And then this will basically run if the code is true again. And then you can add another else if x equal to y, 3 equals this time. And what this will do is basically run through the first condition in the if statement. If it's true, it runs this code and it stops. If it's not true, it checks the next condition. If this is true, it runs this code and then it stops. Otherwise, it goes on and it checks the next else if condition. If this is true, whoops, then it runs this code if it's true, and then it stops running. But again, if it's not true, it will check the last bracket. And if you give it an else here, then this code will run by default if nothing else matches. So here it checks for all these different conditions until it finds a match or a true statement. Once it finds a true statement, it stops running. But if it doesn't find a true statement, it runs all the way to the last bracket with the else. So if there's no else, nothing will run. Otherwise, if there's else and everything is false, this code runs if all else is false. If all else, if all conditions are false. There you go. So that's the if else statement. Quite straightforward. And then you have the switch, which is very similar to the if else. Here the switch, the parentheses takes a value instead of a condition. So you can give it a value of, I mean, you could give it a condition as well, but for this case we will give it a value or a variable which has a value of 10. So this switch will basically check for the value and check for a matching case. So here we define different cases, and these cases are like else if statements that we just covered. So in the case, you will give it a value. So let's say here 5. So here it checks for this case. If it's true, it will run this code, and then we break out of it, and then it checks the next else if it's not true. Let's say 3. Run this code if true, and then break. And in case 10, run this code if true, and then break. Now what I want to do is give each one of these an echo. Value is, say, 5 for all of them for now, and then edit them one by one. 3 and then 10. So again, this switch takes a variable or a value, and that value will be passed in here, and then for each case it will check if this value is matching to this case. Here the case is 5, which is not equal to this, so this won't run. This part won't run. It will move on to the next one. 3 is not equal to 10, so this won't run. Case 10 is correct. It is true. 10 is equal to 10 up here. So this code would run, and we should see value equals to 10, right? So if I just, and as you can see here, it's giving me this red line here because I haven't added a semicolon. So make sure you add every line or end every line with a semicolon, like I mentioned at the start of this video. And as you can see, we've got value as 10. Now say none of these were true, right? What would happen? If 5 is false, 3 is false, case A is false, what would happen? You see nothing. But sometimes you don't want that. You want a default case or a default scenario to play out. So here we'll say this code runs if all conditions are not met, right? So here we'll echo value is unknown, unmatched. Makes more sense. And then we check this, you see value is unmatched because it went through the switch where it checks each case. It didn't find a match, and if it doesn't find any case matches, it just runs the default section or the default block of code. Now say that the value is actually matched to the first one right here, but we didn't add this break. What is the point of this break? What this break does is it stops it. Once this code runs, it stops it from going on to the next part, because we've already matched right here and we've ran this code. We want it to stop running. If we don't add a break, this is what happens. You'll see value is 10, and then it tells you value is 3, even though the value is never 3, but it drops down into the next case, whereas you want it to run this code and then break out of it, right? So that's why you need the break right there, but that basically is the switch. So I'm going to comment this out. Again, we're going to be using this later on, so don't worry, but hopefully understand the concept. And if you're thinking if, else, if, and switch are very similar, that's because they are. But in some cases, you will see that this is better than the other, or one is more suitable or more suited than the other. So it's just about case by case preference, really. Next up, we're going to do the loops, which is a bit more tedious to get your head around. But again, the more you look at this code, the more it'll make sense. If you've done this in JavaScript, hopefully it'll be easier for you to get. We're going to start with the while loop. And a while loop is basically a loop that runs while a certain condition is true. So within the parentheses right here, firstly write the while keyword and then parentheses, and inside the parentheses we'll add a condition. So for the condition, we will add x equals to y again. Actually, we'll do x is greater than 10. Less than 10? Yeah, let's stick to less than 10, sorry. So we need to actually define x. So we'll do x equals to 0. And inside here, the curly brackets is where the code will execute. So what will happen is that this will run this condition at the start. So it will check if x is smaller than 10, which it is. And if it's true, it will run this block of code. So I run if the above condition is true. And then what happens here is you just output any code you'd like to output. So we can output x is, and then the value of x. And remember, you can only add variables like this in strings or double quotes and not single quotes. So if you add a single quote, this wouldn't work, having the x inside the string. So just make sure you have double quotes. And then down here we want to increment x. So you do x plus plus, and then that should basically run this code, check the condition. If it's true, it will run this code, and then it will add 1 to x, and then it will go back to the start. It will check if x is smaller than 10, which is true because x is now 1, and then it goes to 2, and then 3, and then 4, and then 5, and then 6, and then 7, and then 8, and then 9, and then it will get to 10, and it will check is 10 smaller than 10. That is false, and because of that, this won't run and everything will just stop. So we're gonna save this and we're gonna check it, and we're gonna add one more thing. Actually, we're gonna do .php eol, and that's not gonna do anything. So we're gonna do space br, which is a HTML tag for a new line. If you do enter or refresh, you'll see that now we have x is 0 the first time, x is 1 the second time, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and this basically runs 10 times, starting from 0 to 9, and then the 10th time, as you can see, it never runs this code because 10 is not smaller than 10. So you should just be very careful when you write in these statements, because you can run into an infinite loop where this condition is always true, and then your browser will just freeze because it just keeps running and never stops. So you need to make sure that before you run this code, you make sure that your condition is accurate. You know that at some point it's going to be false, right? Because if I, for example, remove this right here and then try to run this code, if you look at this, you'll see that x is 0 when it starts, and then it checks x is smaller than 10, runs the code, goes back, x is still 0, runs the code, x is still 0, runs the code, goes back, x is still 0, and it just keeps running infinitely. And you don't want that. That's why we've added this x++ so that it can increment it each time until it reaches 10. And this is why we have 10 up here, so that we can actually make it stop. So I could have it as 100, I could change this 10 to 100 and it will run 100 times, which is fine because it will still stop at the end of the day. But where you run into a problem is when you write something or you add a condition that never goes false. That is always true, and that is a big problem. Okay, so that's while loop. Hopefully that's clear. We also have do while. And the way you would write do while is by adding a do up here with brackets. So this code now would go into here. Do you know what? Actually, I'm going to comment this out so that you can have two different examples in front of you. And we're going to recreate it because we're getting into the habit of writing the code. So we've got do and then curly brackets. And inside here, we'll have all of this code that we had down there. And then we'll just copy paste it and add a while in the condition. And the condition was x, let's do 10 instead of 100. So what this does is it first runs this code inside the do brackets, and then it keeps running it as long as this is true. Whereas here, it would check the condition first before it runs any code. So the first time it runs, it has to be true before this code runs. But here, even if this is false, this will run at least one time, right? So this is the difference between a do while and a normal while. If we check this, we should see it run 10 times again. The first time it runs is 0, and then it adds 1, and then it goes all the way up to 10. But what happens here is that it runs even if this is false. So if we do x is bigger than 10 or larger than 10 or greater than 10 and we refresh, you'll see that even though this is false all the time, we're still outputting this first one right here in the do brackets. So that's the difference. Hopefully that's clear. Do will run at least one time and then check for the condition and keep running as long as it's true, whereas while will only run when it's true and keep running as long as it's true. And for the, I think the best in performance, you have the for loop. The for loop is basically very similar to the JavaScript, if not identical, in that it takes three different values up here. You have the index that you'll be using, so the variable, which we'll set to 0, x equal to 0, which is similar to doing it up here, but in the for loop you have parentheses, and within the parentheses you'll have three different statements. So x equal to 0, and then the condition that you want the for loop to keep running by as long as it's true, which is x smaller than or less than 10, and then we want to do x plus plus. So this is basically what happens on every iteration. So after the code is run, it will run this, it will increment x by 1. So now we do curly brackets, and inside here is where the code will be iterated. So this code is run multiple times if the above condition is true. So let's just echo, same thing we echoed here. We echo it down here and move this inside. And let's just check this out, right? And see what we get. Again, we get the same thing. X is 1, x is 0, x is 1, up to 9. And just to run you through how this code runs, basically at the start you will set the value that you want to start with, so the index, and you set it to 0. It could be anything, but this is the number you'll start from. And then you will usually have a condition based on this index that you've given it. And this is the condition that it checks for it to run this code. So when it starts is 0. Now, is 0 smaller than 10? It is. So then it will run this code, and then it will add 1, and then it will go back here. Is 1 smaller than 10? It is, so it will run this code, and then it will go back here, add 1. Now it's 2. Is 2 smaller than 10? It is. It will run this code, and then it will add 1. So this is basically the steps that it takes every iteration. So we could change this. Instead of adding 1, we can add 2 each time, right? So we do plus equals to 2. And as you can see now, it's jumping by 2. The first time x is 0, the second time x is 2, the third time x is 4, etc. And each time we're just outputting the value of x, which keeps changing every time we increment it here by 1 or 2. So we'll put this back to plus plus. Remember, we also looked at plus plus x instead of x plus plus. And if you see the difference here, you'll see that it actually looks identical. But what it does here is that it increments the ID, or increments the value before it goes back to the top, right? Whereas with this, it will increment after it runs the code. Here it will increment before it runs the code, and here it will increment after it runs the code. So that's the difference. But again, you're not seeing any difference that is being outputted, but in some cases you will definitely see the difference. That's the for loop. Now my favorite one is for each, because for each basically does everything for you. All you need to give it is the value or the variable that you want to loop through. So let's say we have an array above, right? We have, I think schools is a good example. So we'll loop through schools, right? Or maybe we'll start with cars. Let's start with cars maybe. So we want to loop through the cars array, and we want to use the for each for that. So we'll do cars as car. So this will basically loop through cars and give us a variable called car with each car. And then we'll do brackets, and in here we'll do echo car, and we'll do dot br for the new line. And as you can see, we get the values of each car. So up here you have 20, 50, 100, 200, 60. It gives you all the values, but it doesn't give you the keys, right? So that's what this does. It gives you the values. If you want the keys, you can do key, or give it any name here, index for example, but I'm going to use key for now, and then do the equal and greater than arrow, and then in here we'll do key dot space dash space, close the string dot car, and now you should be able to see the key and the value. And that's basically that. You see, you can do it all within a single or 2-3 lines with very little code. If you wanted to achieve the same thing using the for loop that we used above, you can do x equals to 0, and then x smaller than, and then cars dot length. Actually, there's no dot length in PHP, sorry, it's count cars. I get PHP and JavaScript quite mixed up because I'm always switching between the two, but count cars should give you the length of the array, and then we want to do x plus plus. So now what will happen is that x will keep getting incremented by 1 until it reaches the amount of cars inside the cars array. So inside the cars array, I think we have 6. So this is the same as saying x is smaller than 6, right? So here we want to output basically the same thing we outputted here, but obviously we don't have key or car. So instead of key, we have instead of key, we can do, okay, let's just keep this simple. Let's comment this out and we'll try to figure out what we need, right? So we have cars, and here we'll give it the index, and this should give us the value, right? So if we do this, and we'll actually comment this out, this should go to the cars array, and this will give us a single item in the cars array. So the first time it will give us the first item, second time it will give us the second item, based on the X that keeps changing each time. It says undefined array key 0. So here we actually don't have any indexes of 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. We have associative arrays, literal keys. So as you can see here, we don't have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. We have keys. So for these types of arrays, it's usually best to use a for each, right? And for arrays where you have something like this, for example, where you don't have associative arrays, this will have the equivalent of a key 0, but it's actually an index 0, index 1, index 2, index 3, index 4, index 5. So I think for this example, what we need to do is, instead of using cars, we'll use the other array, which was ARR. So we'll put ARR here, and then ARR here, and that should give us the different values. And we're just going to separate them by a dot, not a dot, sorry, a new line. So dot new line, and as you can see, we have the different values. So remember, when you're using associative arrays, it's better to use this method. And when you're using simple arrays or multi-dimensional arrays, maybe you can use this method. And this method works for both, but for associative arrays, definitely stick to this method. So I'm going to put use this for each for associative arrays. There's one more thing that I have actually missed out in a loop, and it's the ability to break and continue. So if we just go back to this array right here, or this loop, sorry, and inside of here you'll see that we're outputting 0 to 9. We're looping through every time the condition is true if x is smaller than 10, and outputting x is x right here. Now what we want to do is, for example, if x is equal to 0, we don't want it to output. So for the first one, we don't want it to output anything. We just want it to continue. We can literally use the word continue, right? And this will skip that turn. So if it, at the start when x is 0 and x is true, x is smaller than 10, the condition is true, it will check for this if statement, and it will basically check if x is equal to 0, which it is at the start. It will just continue into the next iteration. So if I just refresh this, you'll see that it skipped this code. So it doesn't run this code, it just hits continue, goes on to the next one, adds 1 to x, is x is now 1, is x smaller than 10, yes it is, and then it will output. You can also do break, and break will exit the entire loop, so it won't just continue or skip one turn, it will break out of the entire loop. So now we shouldn't see anything at all, and as you can see, we don't see anything at all. So these are the two different keywords I wanted to cover: continue and break. I'm going to leave continue here and say actually let's just put some comments here. Continue skips a iteration or turn, whereas break breaks out of a loop. Okay, so that's that. We'll comment that out again, and we're going to move on. And the next part is functions. And again, if you've done JavaScript, this should be quite straightforward for you. If you haven't, then I'm going to try to explain it as best as I can. With functions, we usually use these to try and complete a certain task. So different functions will complete different tasks. For example, in a vehicle, and I've given this example previously as well, in a vehicle you have different things. You have a steering, you have a brake system, you have a gearbox, you have the ability to accelerate, you have the ability to press the horn, all of these different functions exist within a car. So what they would do is separate each function on its own so that it does that specific task using that function. So you can't mix the ability to accelerate with the ability to brake. Each one is separate, right? So each one is effectively a different function because it holds different functionality or handles different functionality. So the way you would write this in code is basically using the keyword function, and then you would give it the name that you want to basically give it the name that you want to use. So you need to name that function into something that will make sense to you. So if, for example, if I have a function where I'm gonna greet someone, I could say greeting as the name, and then give it parentheses and then curly brackets, and inside here I can do all the tasks. So perform all function tasks inside these brackets. So here we just want to echo hello, and then we want to customize it a bit. So we want to greet any person by their name, right? So we can't just hard code John because not everyone is called John. We want to keep this customizable or keep it dynamic. So here we'll just give it name, and then this name is not defined, so we need to define it. And where are we going to define this? Usually within the parentheses you will give it something called arguments, and this argument or these arguments are what you pass into a function to allow the function to complete the tasks effectively or correctly or efficiently. So basically this function can't run without these arguments or these things that it needs to complete the function. For example, I've got a little kid who is playing in the area, right? And for him to play in the area, he needs a football. So say I have a function that is called let kid play in area, for example, but for him to play in the area, he needs a football. So I would pass that football right here. I would basically do something like football, and then inside here I can tell the kid to play with the football, right? So inside here I could tell the kid to play with the football, and because I've passed it in, but without it the kid wouldn't know what to do. So this function relies on these arguments. So here this function relies on the name argument, so we're going to pass a name, and then this function now can greet anyone based on their name, right? So this is the defining a function section, and then we need to use this function. So how would we use it? Use a function section. This can be used anywhere in the script, and the way you'd use it is just write the name of the function and then give it the argument, the same way we were doing, for example, str reverse, where we'd write these functions were defined by PHP with the language. They come ready out of the box, so you just write the name of the function and then add an argument in. But now what we're doing is we're writing our own functions. So now we have a greeting function that we've written, so we'll just write it, write the name, give it the arguments. So here I have a person called, say, Jonathan, and now what this function will do is it will say hello to Jonathan, and if I just refresh, you'll see hello Jonathan. I could change this to John Doe, and it will say hello John Doe. And now this function is basically rendering content dynamically based on this data that we're passing it. So that's how you would write a function, and that's how you'd use it. And this is a very basic usage of a function, but I want you to understand the concept. The concept is a function is basically a block of code where a certain task is performed, and that certain task may require certain things for the task to be completed, and these things are called arguments. These arguments are passed in within the parentheses, and then they can be used inside. So that's that for functions. we will be using this a lot more later on, but just to show you an example of a function that comes with PHP, there's a function called date, and what this does, it gives you the date, literally today's date. So if I just do this and do today is dot date, and inside of here we actually give it, so this is the format we want to see. So I'll do YMD. Y is for year, M is for month, and D is for day. If I check this, you'll see we have this format. And if you do 2 double D's, you'll get the same thing. If you do a capital D, you'll get Tuesday instead of a number. So there's different formats, and you can check this out by just googling date PHP format. And then here, if you check on any of these links, you'll see different values that you can use as arguments inside here. So based on these format arguments that you pass in, the value that you see on the browser will be different right here. But that's the basic use of this function. If I give it just date, it says date expects at least one argument, 0 given. So this date, this function, for it to work, it expects you to give it one argument. So this function needs something to work, otherwise it won't work. And this is a fatal error, which means this error will basically cause the script to stop working. So if I say echo hi here, you'll see that hi won't show up because this code stopped running here. And this is something I probably should have mentioned at the start. With PHP scripts, the script runs from top to bottom. So it goes line by line from top to bottom. It reads this line, runs it, and then the next line, and the next line, and the next line. So if for some reason you see code and this line that runs, and then there's something in this line that doesn't run, that means there has been an error somewhere between here to there. Okay, moving on. You might have already clocked this, but just as a side note, you can add a Y here and just get the year instead of the entire date. So if you refresh, you'll get the year. And you don't necessarily need to, get the entire date. So you just wanted the year, and you wanted it to dynamically change on your web page. For example, on Mason Plan, if you take this as an example again, at the bottom you see the year here. So every year this will change automatically. Instead of you changing it year by year, it will just change automatically if you use something like this. Anyway, moving on. Next thing we have is the callback functions, which is similar to functions, but in fact it's exactly the same as functions, but we give it as an argument to another function so that it runs it after it executes the code, or it uses it to execute its code. So for example, there's a function called array_map, and that function takes in 2 parameters. One is the callback. So here we give it a callback function, and as you can see, it says applies the callback to the elements of the given arrays. So what this does, it takes a callback as an argument and an array as an argument, and then it runs that function on every item in that array. So if you have a function that adds 2 to every item, it will run that function on every item in the array, and it will add 2 to each item in the array. And by the end of it, you will have the same array, but each item has been added or increased 2 in value. So to test this out, what we're going to do is we're going to create a function first to pass to it. So we'll just keep this commented out for now. Actually, let's just continue since we've started. We'll do an array map, and then we'll do we'll just say callback. We'll name the function callback that we're passing in, and then the array that we want to pass in. So we'll create this array on the fly, and we'll say this array is let's say this array is football, different sports, tennis, basketball, and what's the last one? Rugby. Sure, why not? Now, if you try to save this and refresh, it'll tell you that on line 24, undefined constant callback. So it's looking for callback, it's not finding any callback, so we need to define a function callback. And this function will take in item, and inside here it will return the string length, which we've already covered before, gets you the length of the string, and then we'll give it item. So we're giving it this item that we're passing in here, and now this callback is literally this function right here. But the problem here is that we need to give it callback as a string. So we give it the name of the function as a string, and then what it's going to do is that it's going to take this function callback, or it's going to look for a function with the name callback, and it's going to take this array and apply this function to it. So the first time it will run this function, it will give it the value football. So item will equal to football, and then it should return the length of that string. And then the next time it will be tennis, following it will be basketball, and then it'll be rugby. So if we just refresh this and have a look, it'll be empty. So what we can do is we can do var dump and have a look at this. And as you can see, it dumps an array with 0, 1, 2, 3, 3 different values, actually 4, because 0 is the first one. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 values, and right here it says 4. The length of this array is 4. The first value is 8, so football should be 8 characters. And then the second one is 6, and the third one is 10, and the fourth one is 5. Rugby is 5 as the last one. So as you can see, it's taken each item in the array and calculated its length using this callback function, and then just given us the value inside of an array. So hopefully that's clear. Another example that I can do is create another function, callback 2 this time, item. Actually, I'm going to name it number instead of item, and then here we want to return item or number times 2. Okay, so now we comment this out, but we're going to copy paste it, and here we're going to use callback 2, and as the values in the array, we'll give it just numbers 2, 4, 6, 8, and 10. And then we'll have a look at this, and we should see that each item gets times by 2, and we get an array with the values. So now instead of having an array with these values, we'll have an array where 2 is times by 2, 4 is times by 4, and 8 is times, or 6 is times by, sorry, 4 is times by 2, 6 is times by 2, 8 is times by 2, and 10 is times by 2. So hopefully that makes sense, and this is basically what a callback function is. It's a function that is used as a callback to either perform another task over different items, or it usually runs at the end of a specific task. Let's comment this out and just give this a name of callback functions, right? And now moving on, we've got something that is slightly, could be confusing. We've touched on this on JavaScript as well, but it's slightly different, not too different in PHP, but this is basically the scopes part. And the scopes are basically different areas in the code where you can access different variables. So we have the local scope, we have the global scope, and we have the static scope. And we're going to cover each one of them. So for the local scope, actually the global is the most common one. So let's start with the global scope. And for the global scope, we basically have, let's say we have x equals to 5, right? And then we have a function, and we call that function test function, just a random name. And inside this function, we want to use this x, right? This x that we've created up here, we want to use it in here. Now we'll try to echo and say x equals to, and then x, and see if it actually outputs. Now to run this function, we'll do function, test function, parentheses, and then we refresh, and it says undefined variable x in 279. So why is that, right? Because this is a global variable, and we're trying to access it inside a function scope. So let's just do echo again outside so that we see the difference. So now what we're doing is we're running this function, and it's going to echo this line, and outside of it we also have this line. So let's just see what this does. And as you can see, the first time it tells us echo equals to 5, and then it tells us, let's just rearrange this. So what we've done here is just basically ran the function first and then outputted the text. So you should see the error first, and then x equals to nothing, and then x equals to 5. So it's run this first, it's run the function, and the function outputs this, and it doesn't know what x is, so it's giving you nothing as a value, and then it runs this and it's giving you 5. Now this is a global function or a global variable, but it can't be accessed within here. So this is where you would use a local variable. So let's say we have x here 10. Now if I refresh this, you'll see that we have x equals to 10, x equals to 5. So we have two x's, one is global outside and one is local inside. So this is a local scope, right? So this is a local scope. Local scope is usually within a block of code or a function, etc. So what we're going to do is actually test a different value. So let's do p inside here. So p equals to 10, and then we output p here, but we don't actually want to run this function. We want to see, actually yes, we do want to run this function, and we want to see if p is accessible outside of the function. So we've run a function which initializes a variable called p with the value 10, outputs this, creates a new line, and then after this function is finished running, it tries to access p again. So this should give us undefined, because outside of the function you can't actually access p because it's a local variable. For global, now this should work inside here, but with PHP, in order to access a global variable, you have to use global x. So you need to use the keyword global, and then the variable that you want to access, and then inside here we'll just do x. And now we should be able to see that x is equal to 5, right? But if we didn't do that and try to access x, you'll see that it's undefined. So that's the difference. If you create a global variable, you can use it anywhere in the code, but you need to make sure that you use the global keyword when it's inside a block of code. And for a local variable, that can only be used inside a block. It cannot be used outside the block or outside a function. And that's basically it for global and local variables. With regards to static is usually used when you need a variable to exist after a function runs, for example. So let's say we have, and I'm going to comment all of this out, and I'm going to create a new function, and I'm going to call it test2, and here we're going to create a variable with a scope of static, and that's going to be x, and we're going to give it 0, and then we're going to echo x, and then we're going to increment x by 1. So what we're doing in this function is just creating a variable x equal to 0, and that's a static variable, and then we're going to echo x, and then we're going to increment x by 1. Now we want to run this function, right? So sorry, not echo, test2. We run it 3 times, and then we'll just see what that gives us. And you see the first time it runs, it gives us 0, and then 1, and then 2, right? Now you see that the first time it runs, usually what happens is that if you run a function one time, it creates variables, and then once it's done running, it will just kill these variables. So if I remove the static, you should see that each time it runs, it creates x is 0, it outputs x, and then it adds 1 to x, but then as soon as the function runs or finishes running, x no longer exists. So x is just destroyed after this function. But what static does is it allows you to maintain the value even after the function has finished executing. So here we've executed test2, but we still want to maintain the value of x, so we use it as a static, and then if we run the function again, x still holds its last value, and then we run test2 again, it still holds its last value. Whereas if you remove this, after every run of the function, it's just gonna default back to undefined. Okay, so that is the difference between local, global, and static scopes. Now for the interesting parts, this is where it gets a little bit more interesting. We have global variables, or super globals as they call them in PHP, super globals, right? So these globals are predefined variables by PHP, and there's a bunch of them, so we're going to try and cover them one by one. And the first one we're going to cover is the globals, which is all the global variables. And to test this, we'll just do a var dump and then globals. Does it have to be capital? Yes, it does. Globals. And here we will actually use the echo pre-tag just to make sure everything is readable, and then just space it out a bit. Have a look at this, and as you can see, wowee. Now the global variables actually shows you everything that we're going to look at, right? So we're going to look at this get, we're going to look at post, we're going to look at underscore cookie, we're going to look at underscore files, we're going to look at underscore server, and these are different. The server is basically an array of all of these values. And what else? We're not going to look at this. We're not going to look at so as you can see, these are the ones that we've actually created, and by default they're given the global scope. So R2, R, cars, schools, these are things that we've created, but they've been given the global state by default. Okay, so this is what we're going to do. Now that you know what globals is, this is basically holding everything that we're going to discuss. So we're going to move on to the next one, which is going to be server. And this is the one that has the most amount of data, I believe. So these are just server values about the user, or about the server that the user is viewing the website from. So here it tells you the user within the server is this person, the home, let's see, what else do we have? They have the language, they have the user agent, you've got the platform that they're using, you've got the host name, so the page name, the website basically, and then you've got the IP address, remote address, server address, all these different server values that you can look at. Okay, so for one reason or another, you're going to find this useful when the right time comes. But for now, just know that you have an array in this underscore server in capitals, which is a predefined super global by PHP. Another one is, actually I need to keep this commented out so you can, I have everything here actually, so we can just move on. Underscore request, this is used for, and this is actually empty right now, but if we refresh, you'll see it is empty, but it's basically where all the data that goes to the browser goes. So if you submit a form, if you're adding, for example, something like, say, color red, you'll see that here. Now you can see within the request, this data has been passed. So sometimes when you're visiting websites, you'll see this thing being added to the top, which is basically a GET request with different data. So this is the key and this is the value, similar to the associative arrays or the object in JavaScript where you have key value pairs. So you've got the key here and then the value. This is literally a associative array with a key and value. And then you can separate them by an and you can add another one like, I don't know, anything random, A equals to P, I don't know. So you start off by doing a question mark and then you add the values separated by an and character. So that's it. So that's requests. You also have, again, so requests, let me just write this down. Request data from forms and URLs, post and get. So these are two different types of requests. There's more, but these are the main ones. And they also have their own arrays. So for post data, you'll see a post array, post HTTP form request data. So this is the array that gets populated when you submit a form. When you sign in and you submit a form, this will get populated with the data you submit so that it later can be checked by the program. Get will check, if I go back a bit and then refresh, you'll see that get actually checks this. So this is get. Get checks the URL. Post checks the data that's being passed, usually with JavaScript, but for get you can pass the data through the URL. So that's what get is. Get is the get HTTP request data, usually through the URL. And then we have the files, which is where you will see uploaded files appear. Right now there's nothing being uploaded, but this is the array where you'll see different uploaded files appear, the data for that file that has been uploaded. Data for uploaded files appear here. And then you have environment variables. Environment variables are set. Environment variable set, and that will be underscore in. At the minute, as you can see, it's empty. Now you don't have to worry about this. We will cover this later on, but usually you will have a file like .env, which will have different environment variables, and then they will be seen within this. But for now, it's empty, and we're gonna come back to this. But moving on, we also have the cookie, which is where all the cookie information will be stored. So cookies are basically data that is stored between sessions. So let's say you visited a website and you started creating a cart on a shopping website, for example, and you've added stuff to your basket, and now you want to come back after a week, you want to find the same stuff in your basket, you don't want to start again. That cookie will keep all the data in there, right? And cookie data disappears when the expiry date passes, so that data will sit there until the expiry date passes, which is usually set by the PHP file or the PHP code or the server. And you also have a session, which is similar to a cookie, except that it expires after you close the window. So when you close a session, it expires. This my screen disappears correctly. I did here, but not there. Disappears at the end of the session or browser session, right? So one way for you to view these in the browser is to right click, inspect, network, application. Actually, let's make this bigger. And here you'll see you've got cookies. Let's just have a look. On this website we've set no cookies, and if you go to the session storage, you'll see that we have nothing here. But if I was to go to something as simple as 3W3 schools, can't pronounce it, and then just check again, inspect, application, and check what they've done with the session, nothing. What they've done with the cookies, look at that. Look at the amount of cookies that we have. That is so dirty. That is called abuse. That's just abusing cookies, really. I don't like that. Anyway, that is all these super globals. So it's good to keep in mind all of these. And the globals at the top basically has all of these inside of it. And each one does a certain thing, so you can look this up, read more about it if you need to, but this is enough information to keep you going, and this is all you really need to know. Now we're going to look at a quick example of how to create a cookie and how to create a session data and store them both. And to do that, we're going to create a new file actually, and we're going to name it cookie. Or should we create a new file? Actually, I don't think it's necessary. Let's just add the code here. Should we? Actually, yes, let's create a new file. I think it'll be easier for you. So we'll do a cookie.php, and inside this cookie we will add a cookie name. Sorry, I forgot to add the tags. So you need to add a PHP tag, opening and closing tag, and inside of it we'll do the cookie name, and we'll set it to user, and then cookie value, we'll set it to John Doe, right? So now what we'll do is we'll also create a HTML document here, and up here in the PHP code we're going to set the cookie. So we want to use the function set cookie, very simple, and then give it the name, which is the cookie name, and then the value, which is the cookie value, variable that we created above. And then we need to give it the time, basically when this will expire, this cookie. So we've got something called time. It's a function that returns the current Unix timestamp, which is basically the time in seconds. And then we want to add how many seconds we want it to expire after from the current time. So we'll do 86400 times 30. 86400 is how many seconds there is in 1 day, times 30 days, and that's it. So the reason I've given it the slash is if you set this path to slash, it's going to make this cookie available across all the domain. So if you have different parts of the website, like for example Mason Plan also has different parts up to the website, so you can do, for example, admin.masonplan or staging.masonplan or customer.masonplan, just different examples. All these are subdomains of the main domain Mason Plan. So if you do that, it will allow the cookie to be available across all these websites, all the domain basically, across the entire domain. So we're going to do that, and this will set it to 30 days, right? So if we just add something to show us that it has been set, and we'll do that inside the HTML body. We'll do open close tag of a PHP inside here, and then do if statement, and there's a function called isSet which checks if as it says, determine if variable is declared and is different than null. So we check if cookie, which is a super global that we've discussed earlier, and then the name of the cookie, which is cookie name, the variable that we used. So we're checking if this is set, if there's a cookie with this name. If there is, then we want to echo, basically output cookie name, and then we want to add the name of the cookie, cookie name underscore name. Let's keep them spaced out. And then we want to add is not set. Now I've done something wrong here, because I want to output is not set at the top, but this is checking if it is set. So how do we do the inverse? We simply do a exclamation mark, and this will check the opposite. So if this is true, this will make it false. If this is false, this will make it true. So this basically checks for it's not set rather than is set. This will make it check for if this is not set, run this. Otherwise we want to echo the name of the cookie and the value of the cookie. So we'll do cookie dot, again space it out, cookie name dot is set, and then line break and another echo, and this time cookie value, or just value is, and then value, right? And then give it the actual value. We shouldn't use this, we want the value from the cookie variable, so we'll do this, and then we'll do cookie name. That way we'll actually get the real value of the cookie, right? So now basically before I run this code, I'll just run through it or talk you through it. Up here we created a user, or a cookie name valued user, and then a cookie value John Doe, and then we set the cookie. We've given it the name, the value, and the time we'd like it to expire, and the path we want the cookie to be available at. Down here we have a HTML file or document, and inside of it we're basically just checking. We have an if statement that checks if the cookie name does not exist, then tell me cookie name is not set. If it does exist, then I want you to tell me the cookie name and the value. And here we get the value from what we spoke about earlier, this super global array. So we're accessing the array, and then we're accessing this index, which is the associative array. This key basically. So now if we just save this and then try to view it by going to cookie.php, you'll see that it says cookie name user is not set. That's the first time we load. But if you go down here and just have a look at the cookies, you'll see that now we have a cookie called user, and the value is John, and this is the equivalent of a space when you when it gets converted. So this is, instead of a space, you get %20, but you can ignore that. The point is we have a cookie and it tells you the path right here, and it tells you it expires when. So if we make this a bit bigger, or we try to expand this expires, you'll see that it expires on the 22nd of September. So right now we're actually on the 23rd. 3rd, so 1 month from now or less than 1 month. And that is basically how you set a cookie. Now, how do you remove a cookie? You can do very simply. Up here you can add, so we'll comment this out because we've already set it. Now if you refresh as well, this will change because now it's set. It will say cookie user is set and value is John Doe. If we refresh again, it's still there, as you can see. Now how do we remove that? Now we can comment all of this out and then try to remove it using, again, we use set cookie. But this time, what do? We give it the name, which needs to be the same name so that we can delete it. And then we don't want it to have any value. And then we just do time, which is the current time, minus any time in the past, basically. Because if it's time in the past, then that means it's expired. So we do that. Now, even if we have all of this uncommented, it will still work, because what it does is it sets the cookie and then it will remove it, because it sets it in a time in the past. So if we refresh this, go back to here, you'll see the cookie has disappeared nicely. And we refresh this, you'll see cookie name user is not set, and that is working perfectly. So I'm just going to comment above this, remove a cookie by setting it to a time in the past. And here we set a cookie by giving it a name, value, and expiration date, time, sorry, and path. Okay, looking good. We save that. Now you might be wondering, what's the point of cookies? The point of cookies is sometimes you want to transfer or use data across the program or the app or the website. So you would use cookies to pass some data across the website, even across different domains. For example, you can use cookies. So that's always good. And for sessions, we're going to create, actually for sessions, I don't think we need to create a new file, but we will anyway. Session.php, PHP tags, open and close. Hopefully you're getting into the habit of doing this. At the top, you need to add session start so that you actually start a new session, and this has to be at the top of the page before anything else, except the tags, obviously. So now what we're going to do is access this variable right here, this super global session, and this is basically an associative array, right? So what you can do is do the brackets, open close brackets, and inside of it give it a key and then equal to value. So we're going to give it a key of, say, fave color, and here we'll use, actually not fave color, let's just say name, username. This is what you do in a real example. In a real world scenario, you'd use username and then the actual username, which could be, say, John Doe again, and then we'll do password, which will be why can't I spell password, which will be password. Okay, so now we can do echo session variables are set. What I'm going to do is just do a quick dump of the session array so I can show you previously what it had, and then I'm actually going to view the session PHP file so that we can see what we have. And as you can see, session variables are set. Right now it's 0, but then it was set. So now if I refresh, you'll see that we have username, John Doe, password as an array, right? So that's an associative array that's been created. And the way you would access them, let's remove this bar dump or comment it out. The way you would access this is by doing, let's say, echo username is, and then here we'll do session username, And I don't think you can actually do it like this inside here. So we're gonna have to actually, because there's brackets, we're gonna have to actually use the string connotation. Session username and then password username. Password. Session username and then session password, sorry. And then we're gonna refresh and just maybe add a line break here and a line break here, dot line break br, and then have a look. As you can see, session variables are set, username is John Doe, password is password. So that this is how you would access it basically. The same way you defined it is the same way you would access it. Quite simple, and that's that. I'm going to save this file and keep it there, and now we can move on to different parts. That's it for super globals, definitely. I think in terms of post and get, that's where the user is submitting certain data to the server. We're going to have a look at this in a real world example. So we're going to leave this out for now, but we will come back to it once we're done with PHP and MySQL. So we're moving on to the include and require keywords, and these keywords basically help us bring in different files. So now that we've created different files, right? I'm going to create a third file, and I'm going to call it include.me.php. And inside here, I'll simply create a variable called text, and I'll give it a value of I've been included, exclamation mark, and that's that. Now in here I want to bring this file in, so I could do include and then the name of the file, include.me.php. / is just for the current directory, although it might not be needed. But so now we go back to our index.php. Don't forget, now we're back in the index.php, so we need to go back to that. And you might not be able to see it, but it's included this file, otherwise we would have seen some sort of error. So now we could do var dump, and the variable that we included was text2, I believe. Oh, it was just text, my bad. So as you can see, we're accessing text from include me inside index.php because we added this. If we remove it, refresh, it doesn't exist. If we include, there you go. There's also another one called require, and what require does, I'm going to require the same file. What require does is it will try to add this file in or bring it in. If it can't, the whole thing will fail. So basically the index.php at this point won't run unless it has this file. So here it's able to include it. If I rename this file to include me too and refresh, you'll see that it's a fatal error. And a fatal error is what causes the program to halt, basically to end, because it can't find this file, and it tells you the reason failed to open, no such file or directory on line 321, so it can't find this file. Now let's put this back to include me, and we'll just uncomment include and remove these two things because I think this still will work, but it's good to do a / because this will work in different languages as well. But for PHP, you can just use the name of the file directly if it's in the same folder. If it's in another folder, you need to make sure you give it the correct path to the file that you'd like to include. But that's basically include and require. They're similar. One causes a fatal error, the other one doesn't. And the other one basically just produces a warning, but the script will still run. So include will cause a warning if not found, but script will continue to run. And you can suppress these warnings as well, but we'll go through that later on in another video. Will cause A. So require will cause a fatal error and script will stop running. Alright, good enough. Now we're getting closer to the end, but we still have a little bit to go through. We're going to go through the ability to create a file, to read a file, to edit files, updating, and to delete a file, even to like copy and move files. So for each one, we're going to create a new file. We're going to start off by just creating a new file, and I'm going to name it create a file.php just to make it intuitive for ourselves. And within this file, the first thing I wanted to go through is how you would check if a file exists, because you're not going to create a file that already exists, right? So to check if a file exists, you would do something like literally an if statement with a condition of file exists. So there's a function in PHP named file exists, and inside of it you would give it what? You would get the file name. So the file name we want to check is if include me. Actually, we're going to create a new file and name it. We're not going to do it this way. What we're going to do is just check if file exists, and the name will be text, or let's say dictionary dot text txt. If this file exists, it will echo file exists, right? And if it doesn't, it won't say anything. So let's just check this very quickly. If I was to go to create file, create file.php, and then check, you'll see that it doesn't say file exists, it's just empty. So that means the file doesn't exist. So now we can create a file if it doesn't exist, right? So usually you would have this in like a, excuse me, in a bracket, in a block of code, and then you'll have an else in another bracket, and inside here you will create the file. That's one way to do it, but we're not going to do it this way. We're going to go down here, and then we're going to actually create the file. So what we can do is we'll do f for file, and then fopen, which is a function that helps us open a file. All right, so we're going to try to open the file, and if it doesn't exist, it's going to create it for us. So the file we want to open is dictionary.txt. We're going to comment this out. So dictionary.txt, try to open it, and you need to give it a flag, the mode that you want to use. And this could be W to write, R to read, A to append to a file. So if a file already has content you want to add to it, you do A, etc. So we're going to actually write to a file, right? We're going to create a file and add stuff to it. So we do this, and then or, if you can't open it, we want to, or you weren't able to create it, then we want to say fail to create file. And die is basically a function where it kills the script. It causes basically a fatal error. It causes the script to stop running. So I've refreshed, and as you can see, we've created a file called dictionary.txt using this, right? And if I was to run it again, refresh, it will just recreate the file again. So if I add some text, save it, refresh, check, you'll see the text is gone. It's recreated the same file again. And that's basically it. Now we want to add content to this file. So we've created a file, we want to add something to this file. We don't want it to just be empty. So what we'll do is we'll do equals to, and then there's something similar to echo, but it allows you to write multiple lines, which is less than sign underscore end, and then in a new line I'll add, let's say line 1, line 2 in capitals, line 3, line 4, and then at the bottom you'll do underscore end again, and these two I believe have to be matching. So they can be anything, but they need to be matching. We will test that out, but for now let's stick to underscore end, and this is the text we want to add to the file basically. So we'll do f write, which will write something to a file, or allow us to write something to a file. The file we want to use is f, and the text we want to add is text. Now we want to be able to write this, or we want to die and say could not write to file. So this will run, or this will run, right? And then we want to close the file using f close, and then give it the file, and then we want to do echo file, and then the name of the file, we'll just put it here, .text written successfully. So now we just check, refresh this, you'll see it says file dictionary.txt written successfully. If you go back here and look at the file, you'll see we have contents. We have the content that we added here. So that's how you create a file. And then if you wanted to not just create a file, but you wanted to update the file. So now we have the file, we want to update it. I'm actually going to create a new file and do update file. Or do I need to do that? It's actually literally just changing this from W to A. So I don't think there's any point in creating a new file. Let's just try to, in create file, we will change the contents from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to 5, 6, 7, 8. Now, if this is really appending, which was the flag that we use in here, the mode append for A for append, this will have the output will basically be line 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I think we stopped at 8, yeah. So we'll try to refresh this, and we'll change this to updated successfully, and then we refresh. You see updated successfully. We'll look at a dictionary.txt. You'll see that they're all the contents are there except this is not on a new line, and that is because the last time we wrote this file we didn't create a new line there. So here we would have needed to add a line like this. So just to demonstrate, I'm going to do 9, 10, 11, 12, and this time I've added lines here and there. So hopefully this should be taken into consideration this time. And if we refresh, look at this, you'll see that everything is in a new line right now. So this, what you see right here in underscore end, it's basically allowing you to write content or text across multiple lines, and it's taken all the line brackets into consideration as well. So it's not ignoring the line brackets or line breaks. Now what I wanted to try is if I was to change end to something, will that still run? So we'll change this to 13, 14, 15, and 16. We refresh. Looks like it's still running, and as you can see, we still have that just fine. And the point of this is that this can be anything you want as long as you have the underscore, and then this is matching the end, and the end needs to be attached to the left. Basically, you can't be spaced out like this, I believe. So that's creating a file and appending. So I'm going to rename this to create and append, or create and update right? So now if you want to run this, you have to go to create and update. You need to make sure you follow the same file name. But we're done with this file for now, I believe. We're going to read an existing file. So we're going to create a new file and just call it readfile.php. And in here, we're going to read the file that we just created. And that is the dictionary.txt. And to read the file, all we need to do is, now that we've added the PHP tags, we want to do file again. We'll put F for file, and then F open, which we've already done. The name of the file, dictionary.txt, and then or die, because we always want it to die if it fails. Unable to open file, exclamation mark. And remember, you need to give fopen a argument, the mode that you want to open it in. We want to read it, so we use the letter R, and then we have multiple files, multiple lines within this code. So we're going to use the while loop, and inside here they've got something called fe of, which basically checks, or as you can see it says tests for end of file on a file pointer. So it just checks for end of file. So this basically says if it's not end of file, and you need to give it the file. So this says if it's not end of file, do something. What is that something? Echo f gets line from file pointer. So this gets the line that it's currently on, and it outputs it. So again, this will run a while loop with a condition of if this is not the end of the file, then get the line and output it with a new line. And then at the bottom we'll do f close, and we want to close the file, and then we want to go to read file.php, and as you can see we have the content of the file right here. So that's looking good, and I'm going to explain this one more time just in case it wasn't as clear. What we've done here is we've created a variable called f. We've opened the file with f open, given it the name of the file, and then the mode we want to use it in. So when we're writing we use W, when we're appending we use A, but when we're reading a file we use R. And then if we can't read the file for some reason, we will die with the text unable to open file, so the whole program will end. But if we can't open it, we move on to the next part, which is a while loop. And this while loop has a condition of if the file isn't ending yet, then we want to get the line that it's currently on, and we want to output it with a line break. That's all that we've done here. So that's hopefully quite straightforward. It will become clearer the more you try to practice it. But we're moving on to the next part, which is actually, now that we've read a file and we've created a file, we can try to copy a file. We can also try to delete a file. So let's try to delete a file first, or shall we try to move a file first? Let's try to move a file first before we delete it. So create a new file, call it movefile.php, and within this we're going to try to basically move the dictionary.txt, right? So where's the movefile.php? Here we go. Create the tags php, there we go. And here we basically want to, all we're going to do is rename the file. Really, by moving the file I meant renaming the file, right? So we're going to rename the file from dictionary.txt, and we're going to put this in a function called rename, and this rename takes in the old name and then the new name, and that's pretty much it. So now that we've given it the old name, we want to give it the new name, which is going to be dictionary.new extension. Let's just do that for now. So it's going to go from dictionary.txt to dictionary.new extension, and we'll give it a flag right here, or a inverse. So if it's not able to rename, if this is false, then we want it to echo could not rename file. If it's true, we want it to do else echo. And if you notice, I'm not giving it the open and close curly brackets, because if it's one line and it's on the same line, you can do this. So else file successfully renamed to dictionary.new extension. And if we go to move file right now, PHP, you'll see that file successfully named to dictionary.new extension, and as you can see, it's changed from text to extension, and we want to change it back. So I'm gonna copy this, paste it here, copy this, paste it here, and then just do that so I can get it back to how it was. Next up, I think we wanted to delete a file. So do we need to create a new file for that? Actually, just for the sake of separating the code, we're going to create a new file and name it delete file, even though we could really do this in the same file that we're currently in. So PHP again, in here we want to do if unlink, and unlink is the function that deletes a file, as you can see right here. We need to give it the path, the file name basically, which is dictionary.txt, and actually I want to delete .env instead of that. You see this file that we created earlier, I want to delete that. So .env, and this will basically try to delete it, and if it deletes it, if you just check the function again, it tells you, it actually doesn't tell you what the return value is, but I think the return value is a boolean, either true or false. So if it deletes it, it's true, and if it doesn't delete it, it's a false. So here basically we're trying to delete it, and if it's false, then we want to echo could not delete file, else echo file blah blah, the name should be here really, successfully deleted, excuse me for the blah blah. And I'm trying to run move file, which is not what I'm trying to actually do. I'm trying to run delete file. As you can see, file blah blah successfully deleted. If we look for .env here, it doesn't exist. So that's how you delete a file, using unlink. I think that's it for file manipulation for now. We've covered quite a bit, to be honest, and I think it's a good point to move on. We could do file upload, but I think that's something that we're going to cover in the real world example, or when we get to the last part of this course where we put everything together. So we'll keep that till then. There's one more thing, or I think 2-3 more things I wanted to cover, and that is the JSON format data type. So you've got JSON right here, and if you remember, and if you've done JavaScript with me, you would have seen me cover this, where I've gone through what a JSON is, and it's basically a, I'll get you the actual meaning, JSON meaning, and you'll see here JavaScript object notation. So this is literally like an object, and you've got a key value, and it's even more so like an associative array, but it's not an array, it's an object, and it has key value pairs, and the keys are encompassed in quotes, and the values the same as well, unless they're numbers. So for example, I'll give you a very quick example. It will be something like name John, I don't know, age 18, school, secondary, etc. So this is basically a JSON. This is JSON format. You've got the object, and then within it you have the key and the value separated by commas, key value, key value. And for PHP, you have a couple of functions that come with it to handle JSON data. One is JSON encode and one is JSON decode. So let's try to, I want to try and create a real example. So I'm going to create a file and name it example.json, and inside of this I'm going to give a few attributes basically. Let's see if this works. So same example that we just did, John Doe, age and say 19, and we said school, and we said what was the school? I can't remember. We said secondary. Yes, we did. So now I want to bring this into the index.php, right? One way you can do this is by getting the contents of a file. So we can do file get contents and then the name of the file. So I'm going to do example.json, and then I'm going to try to var dump the file to see what we're actually working with. And remember, we're back on the index.php, so make sure you go to that. And as you can see, it says we have a string of 69 characters, and this is what the string includes basically, but in reality it's not a string. So this is where the JSON underscore decode would come in handy. So this basically decodes a JSON string. So this is a JSON string, and we want to decode it into its actual format. So we do JSON decode and then F, and we actually just want to save this in the variable so that we can see it. And as you can see now, that string has become an object. And this is the other data type that we were speaking about at the top here, where I said object, an instance of a class. This is a standard class. So this is the other object or the other data type that I mentioned, which is an object. And now you have a object with a key name and the value string, key age and the value 19, key school and the value secondary. So that's the difference between that string and the object. So this is decoding. Now say you had the data and now you wanted to save it to a file, right? So this time we have, let's comment this stuff out. This time we have the data, so we're gonna pull this data and then change it to become an array. So just wrap it around an array and then change these to equal greater than. So now we have an actual PHP array or PHP array, and let's just name that JSON equal to array. If we var dump this, we see that this is an array, right? Var dump, I need to put a semicolon. Var dump, no such thing as array, sorry, this is a JSON. Var dump JSON, and here you go, you have an array. Now if you wanted to change this or encode this into a JSON, what we could do is we could do JSON encode and then do JSON. And now if you look at, and just make sure you save this to JSON equals to this, so that we store the data and then we can view it. And as you can see, it's turned it again into a string, right? So that's basically how you would edit the JSON data back and forth, and this will be useful when you're passing data from JavaScript to PHP and back and forth basically. Now if I wanted to output this data to the file, what I could do is there's a function called file put contents, and here you'll add the name of the file you want to put the contents to. So we'll do explain2 and then, or example2, and then it takes in the data that you want to pass in, which is JSON, and then does it take any other? I think that's enough for now. So let's just save this and see what we get. If we refresh, you see it's created a new file, and in this file we've actually created a JSON, but the difference between this is styled out, or it's been indented, so it's readable. You can actually read this clearly, but this is, imagine if this was a lot longer, then you wouldn't be able to see all the contents clearly. So one way you could fix this is JSON pretty print in PHP with file put contents. So let's just check how this is done. And if you go to right here, you'll see that when you encode, you can encode using JSON pretty print, and that should fix the issue. So if you go here, JSON encode, we'll do comma JSON pretty print. Now if you try to refresh and look at the file, you see that we have two almost identical files, but we just have a spacing issue, but it's pretty much identical. So that's how you would manipulate JSON data or encode and decode JSON data. Get it from a file and save it to a file. You can use these methods, and I'm gonna keep this commented out. In fact, I'm gonna create a new file and then name it json.php, and inside here I'm gonna copy all of these just so that everything is separated, and when you come back to it later on, everything is clearly laid out so that it doesn't confuse you. But I'm going to comment it all out. Feel free to leave it uncommented. But that is the JSON portion of this video. Now, there's just a few more things again. We haven't covered classes, we haven't covered objects, and we haven't covered inheritance. So I think these are the last two things that we're going to cover, because this video is a lot longer than I'd liked it to be, but it is what it is. I need to make sure that you get exposed to these concepts, and I try to explain them in the best way possible. So let's jump into class. Now class is basically, as we saw earlier, if we just refresh our memory, class, whoops, we need to go to PHP, and then down here we go to what is OOP. So a class is basically a blueprint where you set certain properties within that class, and then you can create objects or instances of that same class. So for example, you have a class of fruit, and then you create an instance of an apple, an instance of a banana, an instance of a mango, which are all fruits. So they're all instances of the class fruit, and they will all share certain properties that are common within the class fruit. So instead of trying to explain it with words, which is always more difficult than actually just writing the code, I'm gonna create a class fruit and show you what I mean. So here the properties will sit at the very top of the fruit class, and again it's just the keyword class and then the name that you want the class to be. So this can be anything you'd like, except obviously the keywords in PHP. Try to avoid those. Properties, the fruit will have a property like name, for example. It will also have a property of, let's say, color. It will have a property of smell. It will have, I think that's it for now. That's enough. Now what we want to do is within the class object, we have different properties, we also have different functions, right? So the first function that will run automatically when a object has been created using this class is the function underscore construct. And again, this will run automatically when you create an object using this class. So what we want to do is give this an argument of name and color and smell, right? So here we will just use this keyword, which will give us access to this scope, these attributes. So we want to use this name, and we want to update it to the value that we received in the argument. So when we create an object, we will give it these values, and these values will be saved into these properties. And I'll show you what I mean right now, but let's write the code. Color equals the color. This smell equals to smell. And then let me just write a comment up here. This will run when object is created automatically. This will run automatically And then there's also another function that we won't really use, but this just for knowledge purposes, this will run when script ends, or end of script. This will run end of script. So when script comes to an end, this will run, but we're not going to use this, so we'll just keep it empty. For now, we want to give it a new function, which we will call, and that will be a getName function. And here we will simply just return this name, right? And what else do we want to do? We want to, now that we've created these properties, and it looks like there's an error here. What's the error? Unexpected variable name, expected function, or const. So the problem with this is that we need to give these what they call access modifiers. So we need to either define if this is going to be a public, protected, or private. So this is all public, and this is public. So we set this as public, and that should get rid of the error. And this basically means that this can be accessed from outside the class, and we'll get to that. But let's first try to use this class. So now we've defined this class. Now we want to actually try and use it. So we have a variable called mango, as we discussed. And here we'll create a new fruit. And inside this, excuse me, inside this we'll give the fruit a name, which will be mango. Color will be gold, and then the smell, we'll give it to true. We'll set it to true, which means there is a smell basically. We'll create a new one, watermelon, new fruit. Again, the name is watermelon. Color, we'll just say green, and then true, yeah. And then last one, we'll give it apple, or we'll create a variable called apple, which will create a new object using the class instance apple, and that will be red, the color red, and we'll say it has a smell as well. So now if we just try to var dump any of these, we'll start with mango and just have a look at it and see what we have. So what this has done is created an object of fruit, of class fruit, and the name is mango, the color is gold, and the smell is true. So it's actually ran this function for each one, taken in the name, the color, and the smell, and it's set it to the properties right here. So now we have a fruit with these properties, and now you can see the point of actually creating a class and then creating objects like this. You can reuse the same code for different variables that share certain common elements or common properties using these classes. Let's try to use the function that we created, getName. So we'll do mango, and then to use the function we'll use this arrow dash greater than arrow, and then the name of the function, getName, parentheses, and we need to make sure that you add an echo at the start so that it actually echoes the name. And then on the other line, or the next line, we'll do the next one, which is watermelon, and then the last one, which is apple. But I want to separate all of these by a new line, so I'm going to do that by just adding BR to two of these, so right here and right here. And as you can see, we've got mango, watermelon, and apple. So we've written the same function once, but we're using it multiple times. We've written this class once, but we're using it multiple times. So this is how you would create a class, this is how you would use a class, and this is how you would call different functions within the class. Now, the part that I wanted to cover as well is access modifiers. So let's say we wanted to access the property color. So we want to get the color of mango. We'll do color. Now you see the difference between accessing a property and accessing a function is when you access a property, you don't give it these parentheses, right? So you just type in the name of the property. When you get in a function, you type in the name of the function and then parentheses, which basically calls the function, gets it to run basically. So now we're getting the color of mango. So mango dash greater than color, and we just refresh this. And actually I'm going to comment all of this out because we don't need it right now. Refresh this, you see it's gold, and that's perfect. But if I was to change this from public to protected, what do you expect to happen? As you can see, it says cannot access protected property color. Because it's protected, that means it's only accessible within this class. Outside of this class, which is where this is, it doesn't allow you to access it. If I change this to another one, another modifier or access modifier called private, obviously this is not going to work as well because this is a private property. So protected properties and private properties cannot be accessed from outside, whereas public properties can always be accessed from outside. So keep that in mind because you will encounter this quite a lot. And I think that is pretty much it when it comes to classes. And I'm gonna write a few comments just so that you can remember the public, and this can be added to the properties and also the functions. So you can have functions that are public. For example, public function, let's say for example get name, we'll set this to public, and then we'll try to run it down here. Let's comment this out, run this, run this, and run this, and we'll have a look at this, still running. If I change public function get name to protected function, what do you expect to see? Again, you can't access this. So this access modifier can be given to the properties, and it can also be given to the functions. So it's a good habit to always add these in before you write the function. So public function, these are all automatic functions, so you don't need to give it public or private or protected. But that's it for this part. Let me write these down. Public, property, or method or function mean the same thing, so let's just put function. Property or function can be accessed from everywhere. This is the default. Protected can be accessed within the class and by classes derived from that class. And we will cover this part next. What do you mean by derived from that class? Private can only be accessed within the class. Okay, so what we're going to do here is we're going to set this to protected, and we're going to set this to private, right? So we've got private and protected. Now, what we want to do is we want to create a new class and derive that class from here, which is what they call inheritance, right? So we'll create a new class right here, and we'll name this, let's say this is a specific type of fruit, and this fruit will be, I can't remember the name, was it durian? Durian, yes, durian. This is a fruit that I came across in Malaysia. I've actually never tried to eat it, but people are, it's almost as if people are scared of it because it smells really bad, like really, really bad, like as if you went to the toilet bad. But anyway, we'll use durian, and what we're going to do is we're going to extend this or inherit. Is it extends? I think it's extends fruit. So we're going to create a new class durian, which extends from this class, and we're going to do function construct name. Actually, we're not going to do none of this, and let's see what happens. So we need to give it some new properties, so we'll do public is fresh, and then here we'll just set is fresh from the argument. So is fresh will equal to the argument or the value that we pass in, which is fresh. And I think that's it for now. What we really want to test is creating a new variable. So we'll just name it durian, and then we will do new durian. And here we will pass in is fresh, we'll say false, actually we'll say true. And now we want to comment all of these out and just see what we have with durian right now. So we'll do durian and then refresh, and as you can see we have is fresh, which is true, we have name, which is null, we have color, protected, and we have smell, and it's private. Okay, interesting. So what if we wanted to give a name and a color as well as a smell? We could try to just give it in here. Durian, color is more yellowish than anything. And then the smell will be true, definitely true. And then this true will be the is fresh. So up here, we need to edit this and give it the name, the smell, the name, the color, the smell, and then is fresh. Now I just need to copy this from up here to down here, and this will get set to this, color will get set to the color, smell will get set to the smell, except that there's no this. So these properties, name, color, smell, don't actually exist in this class. Actually, let's just try this and see if it actually works. So if I refresh, I've given it the name, I've given it the color, I've given it the smell, and I've given it is fresh, and I've added it here, and I've saved and I've refreshed, and as you can see it actually does update these values. Even though this class doesn't have these properties here, it does use this and it updates them, because this durian actually extends from fruit. So by default these properties get copied over here, or they are accessible. For smell, you see that it says null, or at least the smell that is under fruit has been set to null, or is set to null because it's private, so it can't be updated. What it's done is created its own smell, which is set to true. So the name is the same name that's coming from the fruit, the color is the same color that's coming from the fruit, but the smell is actually a new smell, because the first smell that we have here is set to private, so you can't access that or update it. So now what I wanted to try is basically to see what I can access and what I can't access, right? So let's say durian, we want to access the smell. We will access the smell because we've created a new smell right here. Now what we want to try and do is access the protected one, which is color. Can we access the protected one? It tells you that you can't access the protected one, as you can see. So that's the point of having protected and private. Once again, the public basically means the property or the function can be accessed from anywhere, and this is the default. So if you miss out public, either it's not going to work or that's going to be the default. Protected can be accessed from within the class or by anything that's been derived. So if I've derived durian from fruit, then I have access to the name, to the color. Color is protected, but I still have access to it inside of durian. And if it's private, then smell, for example, right here can only be accessed from fruit, right? Here I've created a new smell, but it's not the same smell that is in fruit, because fruit has smell that is set to private. So just keep that in mind. Make sure you try to use these correctly. Usually you'll be using public and protected, but for some cases where you don't want certain functions to be accessible to the public, then you can do, or you can set it to private. Again, we will cover all of these in our real world example when we are putting everything together. But just try to understand these concepts. You've got 3 different access modifiers, and these are the 3, and this is exactly how you inherit from one class to another, right? I think that pretty much wraps it up for this video, and that is pretty much PHP for you. We have covered quite a lot once again, and if you're finding this quite overwhelming, don't worry, because it's only going to get easier from here. We have one more to cover in MySQL, and then we're possibly going to try to build a social networking website or some other real world example where we can practice everything that we've learned from HTML, CSS, JavaScript, PHP, and also MySQL, which is the next video coming. So make sure you stay tuned for that. If you have any comments, if you have any questions, feel free to leave them. I'll try my best to get back to you, and I'll make sure that I set up some sort of Discord server so that you guys can get in touch, leave any questions, and I'll be able to help you. And I will be sure to add that to the description as soon as that comes out, so make sure you look out for that. Until then, take care.